Love by contract. The maid's life changed when the prince hired her to pretend to be his fiancé. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Eleanor Hart learned early that silence could keep a roof above her head. It did not always keep dignity. That morning the servants' passageways were already busy, feet quick on stone, hands full, voices low. A bell had rung twice from the upper floors. That meant haste. That meant no one wanted an error. Eleanor carried a folded note on a small tray, the wax seal unbroken, the paper cream and heavy. She had been told plainly, "Deliver it to the lady's maid in the east corridor." East corridor, lady's maid. She repeated the words in her mind as she walked. A footman rounded a corner, nearly colliding with her. "Mind yourself," he murmured, not unkind, but impatient. "Yes," Eleanor said and slid past him. At the turn, the corridor widened. Two doors faced each other, both polished, both guarded by the same sort of quiet importance. Eleanor hesitated. A maid in a cap passed behind her and whispered, "Quickly, Eleanor. They are waiting." Eleanor nodded, stepped forward, and offered the tray to the first maid she saw in the east corridor. The woman snatched the note without looking. "Finally," the maid said. "Take yourself along." Eleanor began to retreat. She had taken 3 steps when a sharper voice stopped her. "You Hart." Eleanor turned. Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, stood at the corridor's far end like a wall that had learned to speak. Her keys hung at her waist. Her gaze took the note tray, the empty place where the note had been, and then Eleanor's face. "Yes, Mrs. Pritchard," Eleanor said. Mrs. Pritchard lifted a hand. The maid who had taken the note froze. "Let me see that," Mrs. Pritchard said. The maid hesitated. "It was for—" "Give it to me." The maid surrendered the note, suddenly pale. Mrs. Pritchard looked at the seal. She did not break it. She did not need to. She turned the envelope slightly, so the light caught the ink. "This is addressed to the royal secretary," she said, "not a lady's maid." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I was told East Corridor," Eleanor said quickly. "To the lady's maid." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with decision. "And did you look with your own eyes at the name written there?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. "No, Mrs. Pritchard, I believed what I was told." Mrs. Pritchard's voice did not rise. That was worse. "Belief is for prayer. In this house we deal in certainty." The corridor had gone still. A few servants lingered, pretending to dust, pretending to wait for tasks. Eleanor could feel their attention like pins. Mrs. Pritchard turned to the maid who had taken the note. "You, back to your work. And you," she said, facing Eleanor again, "will come with me." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the tray. Her cheeks burned. She wanted to say that she meant no harm. She wanted to say that she had been running since dawn, and her hands had not stopped moving once. None of it mattered. Intent did not matter. Only order mattered. She followed Mrs. Pritchard down the passage, the keys at the older woman's waist giving a small, relentless chime. They stopped near the servants' hall where several staff members were already moving between tasks. Mrs. Pritchard did not lower her voice. "This," she said, holding up the unbroken envelope, "is what happens when someone allows herself to be careless." "I wasn't careless," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Pritchard's head turned, slow and exact. "Beg pardon." Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Prevent it. Repair it." She swallowed. "I mean, Mrs. Pritchard, I did not intend—" "You intended nothing," Mrs. Pritchard said. "That is the problem. You allowed yourself to be led. The household is not led by the youngest and the least experienced." A few servants looked away. A few looked at Eleanor with sympathy they could not afford to show. Mrs. Pritchard held Eleanor's gaze. "If a letter goes to the wrong hands, do you know what follows?" Eleanor's voice came out small. "No, Mrs. Pritchard. Questions," Mrs. Pritchard said. "And once questions begin, they do not stop at the right person. They stop at the nearest." Eleanor's throat tightened. She thought of dismissal. She thought of the street. She thought of her mother's last winter, when coal had run short and pride had been the first thing to freeze. "I can do better," Eleanor said. "Please, I can." Mrs. Pritchard's lips pressed together. "You will, because I will see to it." She turned slightly to address the others, still without raising her voice. "Let it be known, a maid who cannot read a name cannot be trusted with anything. Miss Hart will not handle correspondence again until I decide she has earned it." The humiliation was clean. It left no mark to point at. It only changed the air around Eleanor. She was suddenly a cautionary tale. "Yes, Mrs. Pritchard," Eleanor whispered. Mrs. Pritchard handed the note to a footman. "Take this to Mr. Ashcombe immediately. Apologize for the delay. Tell him it was intercepted before it reached improper hands." The footman nodded and hurried off. Mrs. Pritchard faced Eleanor again. "Now, you will do linens, quietly, efficiently, and you will not place yourself in the path of anyone important. Do you understand?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "Say it properly." "Yes, Mrs. Pritchard." Mrs. Pritchard walked away. The corridor returned to motion. Conversations resumed in murmurs. Tasks resumed with a hunger that felt like relief. Eleanor remained still for a moment, her hands empty, her heart beating too hard in her chest. A young scullery maid slipped past her and murmured, "I'm sorry." Eleanor nodded once. She did not trust her voice. When she reached the linen shelves, she took a stack of folded sheets and pressed her fingertips briefly to the silver thimble tucked in her apron pocket. It was plain. It was old. It had belonged to her mother. It reminded her that hands could build a life, stitch by stitch, if they were allowed to keep working. She lifted the linens and started down the quieter corridor that led toward the private wing. It was not the corridor she would have chosen, but it was the corridor she had been sent to. "Linens for the prince's rooms," the under-butler had said, "and mind that you do not dawdle." Eleanor did not dawdle. She moved with care, eyes down, shoulders tight. At the bend near a small alcove, she heard voices, not servants' voices. They came from behind a door that was not fully shut. The voices were controlled, but control did not mean calm. It meant someone was struggling to keep fury from becoming scandal. Eleanor's first instinct was to retreat. Then a phrase caught her like a hook. "You cannot delay any longer, Your Highness." Eleanor stopped without meaning to. Another voice answered, low measured, young enough to be close to Eleanor's own age, but weighted with something older. "I am aware of time, Mr. Ashcombe." Mr. Ashcombe. The name struck her. Royal Secretary. The note. Eleanor's chest tightened. She had brought his note to the wrong hands. She had been shamed for it. Now she was near his door. She should go. She should go now. Then a third voice, sharper and female, spoke with the crisp certainty of high rank. "The court does not ask for your preference, Thomas. It asks for your obedience." Eleanor's fingers clenched around the linens. Thomas. She had heard servants say the prince's name in whispers, never aloud, never with familiarity. To hear it spoken like that with reprimand made her stomach twist. "I will not be spoken to as though I were a schoolboy," the prince said. The woman gave a soft, unpleasant laugh. "Then stop behaving like one." Mr. Ashcombe's voice cut in, polite as a blade. "Your Highness, Lady Beatrice Langford is prepared. Her father has made it plain that his support will be steadfast. The palace requires steadiness." The prince did not answer at once. Eleanor felt a strange ache, as if the silence itself was heavy. Then the prince spoke again, quieter. "Prepared. Like a document, like a duty," the woman said. "You were born for this." "I was born," the prince said, "for many things I did not ask for." "Mr. Ashcombe replied. "Nevertheless, the announcement must be made before the season's end. The newspapers are already hungry." The woman's voice softened, and that softness frightened Eleanor more than the sharpness had. "The longer you delay, the less choice you will have. Better to accept a match that is respectable than to have one forced upon you by rumor." "I do not require you to threaten me," the prince said. "I am not threatening you," she replied. "I am describing the world." Eleanor's throat tightened. She should not be hearing this. She had no right. She was a maid with linens, lingering where she had been told not to linger. Her foot shifted. The linen stack brushed the wall. A small sound. Nothing, yet the voices stopped. Eleanor's breath caught. She turned, intending to flee. The door opened. Eleanor froze. The first man she saw was not the prince, but a tall gentleman showing the careful, tidy face of someone who lived in paperwork. His expression was sharp, assessing. "Mr. Ashcombe." Behind him the prince stood half a step back, as if he allowed no one to stand fully in front of him. He wore a dark coat. There was nothing decorative about him. His posture was perfect in a way that looked less like pride and more like armor. Eleanor dropped her gaze immediately. "I beg your pardon, sir. I did not mean to—" Mr. Ashcombe's voice was flat. "Who are you?" Eleanor's hands trembled around the linens. "Eleanor Hart, sir. Housemaid." Mr. Ashcombe's eyes flicked to her apron, her plain cuffs, her lowered head. "Why are you here?" "I was sent with linens," Eleanor said. "I did not intend to listen. I only paused." Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened, as if he had tasted something unpleasant. "Pausing is a choice, Miss Hart." Eleanor's cheeks burned again, shame stacking upon shame as if the day would not be satisfied until she disappeared entirely. The prince spoke then. His voice was calm, but it carried. "That is enough, Ashcombe." Mr. Ashcombe turned slightly. "Your Highness, she heard nothing she will repeat," the prince said. Eleanor's head lifted a fraction before she could stop herself. She did not look at him directly. It felt dangerous. But she could not help noticing how firm his tone was. Not cruel, not indulgent, simply final. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze returned to Eleanor. "You will forget this corridor exists." "Yes, sir," Eleanor said. The woman's voice came from deeper in the room, closer than Eleanor expected. "Let her go, Thomas, and close the door properly this time." Eleanor's eyes stayed down. She wished she could evaporate. The prince did not answer the woman. He looked at Eleanor. She felt it, a weight, not physical but unmistakable, like being looked at by someone who was used to being looked at, and who still hated it. "What did Mrs. Pritchard say to you this morning?" the prince asked. Eleanor's stomach lurched. How did he know? He should not know, unless the household's gossip moved faster than bells. Eleanor swallowed. "Mrs. Pritchard corrected me, Your Highness." Not too much detail, not too little. Her voice came out steady, though her fingers trembled around the cloth. "For what?" the prince asked. Mr. Ashcombe shifted, clearly displeased by the conversation continuing at all. Eleanor hesitated. It felt like stepping onto ice. "For delivering a note incorrectly, Your Highness." "Mr." Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. "What note?" Eleanor's heart hammered. If she spoke, she implicated herself further. If she lied, she might be caught. The prince spoke first. "A note addressed to you, Ashcombe." Mr. Ashcombe's expression sharpened. "The one delayed this morning?" "Yes," the prince said. Mr. Ashcombe looked at Eleanor with something like disdain. "So, carelessness compounds." Eleanor's eyes stung. She forced herself not to blink too quickly. Tears were another kind of mistake. The prince's voice hardened again, remembering, defending. "Ashcombe, leave us." Mr. Ashcombe's head turned. "Your Highness?" "Leave us," the prince repeated, "and close the door behind you." The woman in the room gave a soft scoff. "Thomas." The prince did not look away from Eleanor. "Please," he said to the woman, and the word sounded like a command, dressed as courtesy. There was a pause, then footsteps retreated into the room. Mr. Ashcombe hesitated one more breath, then stepped back inside. The door remained partly open, as if the corridor itself was not permitted complete privacy. Eleanor stood alone with the prince in the threshold. She held the linens too tightly. Her hands ached. The prince said, "You have been corrected twice in one day." Eleanor's voice was quiet. "Yes, Your Highness." "And yet you did not argue," he said. She almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. A maid does not argue with those above her. The prince's gaze stayed on her face. Eleanor could not read his expression. It was controlled, but it was not cold. "What do you want, Miss Hart?" he asked. The question startled her. It felt improper. It felt like being asked to confess something she had never been allowed to name. I want to do my work well," Eleanor said. "That is not what I asked," he replied. Eleanor's throat tightened. Her eyes flicked up for half a heartbeat, then down again, revealed in her. She did not know the prince could ask questions like that. "I want," she said carefully, "to keep my position." The prince nodded once, as though that answer made sense. "And if your position were taken from you?" Eleanor's breath caught. "Then I would seek another." "Where?" he asked. She could not answer without saying the truth. There was no easy other place. There was only the cold edge of London streets, the crowded houses, the long lines, the thin soup, The look people gave when you had nothing respectable left. "I do not know, Your Highness," revealed in her, "but I would try." The prince's mouth tightened slightly, not contempt. Something else. Frustration, perhaps, at the simplicity of her choices. He said, "How old are you?" Eleanor blinked. 22, Your Highness." "And you can read?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Not like a lady, but I can read." The prince's eyes held hers a little longer than was comfortable. Eleanor's skin warmed under the attention. It felt like stepping too close to a fire you were not meant to approach. He said, "Do you understand what you heard just now?" Eleanor's heart jumped. "Your Highness, I did not—" He lifted a hand. "Answer the question." Eleanor swallowed. "I understand that you are being pressed to marry." The prince's eyes flicked away for a moment toward the room behind him, where other voices waited. Then he looked back at Eleanor. "And what do you think of it?" he asked. The absurdity nearly stole her breath. "My opinion is not requested." "It is now," the prince said. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the linens. She could not afford insolence. She also could not afford to speak too freely. Yet he was insisting. She chose truth, small and safe. "I think you sound unhappy." The prince stared at her, and for a second he looked younger, not boyish, simply human. He said. "Unhappy is permitted only in private." Eleanor did not know what to say to that. He glanced at the linens. "Put those on the table in the alcove." Eleanor obeyed quickly, glad to have action. She stepped into the alcove, laid the folded sheets down, and turned back. The prince remained in the threshold, not fully inside his room, not fully in the corridor, as if he too were undecided where he belonged. He said, "You made a mistake with a note this morning." "Yes, Your Highness." "You paused in this corridor just now," he continued. "And you did not run when you were caught." Eleanor's cheeks warmed again. "I wanted to run, but you didn't," he said. Eleanor's voice came out small. "There was nowhere to go." The prince regarded her. Then he said, "That is the first honest thing anyone has said to me all week." Eleanor's breath caught. She did not know what to do with that confession. He stepped forward slightly, not too close. Proper distance. But the corridor felt smaller nonetheless. He said, "Miss Hart, I am going to ask you something unusual." Eleanor's spine tightened. Unusual could be dangerous. Unusual could be ruin. "Yes, Your Highness," she said. He did not smile. His eyes were steady. "I require time." Eleanor nodded, even though she didn't understand. "Yes, Your Highness." "I require time without appearing to delay," he added. Eleanor's throat tightened. I don't know how I can help, Your Highness." The prince's voice softened, and that softness made her more afraid than any harshness would have. "You can help because no one expects you to be anywhere other than where I place you." Eleanor's stomach turned. She forced herself to breathe. He continued, "The court wants an engagement announcement. They want a name, they want a face, they want certainty." Eleanor's lips parted slightly. The shape of his words began to form a picture in her mind, and she wanted to reject it before it could become real. The prince said, "If I give them a fiancé, they will stop pushing for a wife, at least for a time." Eleanor stared, forgetting to look down. "A fiancé?" "Yes," he said. Eleanor swallowed. "Your Highness, I am a maid." "I know what you are," the prince replied, calm. "That is precisely why you are useful." Useful. The word landed like a stone in her chest. He saw it land. His jaw tightened, as if he regretted his phrasing and refused to apologize for it. He said more carefully, "You are unknown to the court. You are not attached to any family that would attempt to govern me. You are quiet. You listen. And you are frightened enough to consider an offer that someone with options would refuse." Eleanor's hands curled into fists at her sides. She did not want to be predictable in her fear. She also did not want to be brave in a way that ended with her ruined. "What offer?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The prince reached into his inner coat pocket. He pulled out a folded document, thick paper, already prepared. He held it out, not thrusting it at her, simply offering it as one might offer a glass of water. "A contract," he said. Eleanor did not take it. She stared at the paper as though it might bite her. "A contract," she repeated. "Yes," the prince said. "You will pretend to be my fiancé for a set period of time. You will be trained." You will be presented. You will behave as you are instructed." Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she could hear it. The prince's voice remained level. "In return, you will receive a sum of money sufficient to leave service. You will have lodgings arranged. A new start." Eleanor's mouth went dry. Money sufficient to leave service. She could not even imagine such a sum. It sounded like fairy tales told to children to make them sleep. She whispered, "Why would you trust me?" The prince's gaze did not waver. "Because you have no interest in humiliating me. You have no power to gain from it. You would be destroyed along with me." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And if I refuse?" The prince paused. For the first time he looked almost uncomfortable. He said, "Then my secretary will insist that you be dismissed for overhearing. The household will treat it as necessary, and you will leave with nothing." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "That is not fair," she said before she could stop herself. The prince nodded once as if he agreed. "No, it is not." His honesty hurt worse than a lie. A lie would have given her something to argue against. Honesty left her only with truth. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were raw at the knuckles from scrubbing. They did not look like hands that belonged in drawing rooms. She heard herself say, "You would make me pretend to be a lady." "I would make you pretend to be my fiancé," he corrected. "The court will decide what kind of lady you are." Eleanor's voice shook. "They will hate me." The prince's mouth tightened. "They will test you." "That is the same thing," Eleanor said. The prince did not deny it. "Perhaps." Eleanor took a slow breath. She tried to make her mind work like it always had. Count the risks, count the necessities. If she refused, dismissal was likely. Mrs. Pritchard had already publicly marked her as unreliable. If someone decided she had heard too much, there would be no mercy. If she accepted, she would step into a world that could crush her with a raised eyebrow. But she would have money at the end. And she would have protection now, at least while the contract lasted. Protection. Another word that sounded like a gift and felt like a chain. Eleanor lifted her eyes. "How long?" The prince's gaze sharpened. 3 months. Eleanor's breath caught. 3 months of pretending. 3 months of a court scrutiny. 3 months of being watched and weighed and found wanting. "And after?" she asked. "After," he said, "the engagement will be quietly ended. I will claim a change in circumstances. You will leave with your payment. You will be free." Free. Eleanor nearly laughed again. Freedom offered by someone who had never been free. She swallowed. "What would I be called?" The prince hesitated, then said, "Lady Eleanor." Eleanor flinched at the title. It did not fit her. It was too large, too loud, too easily pulled away. "I cannot do this," she whispered. The prince's eyes stayed on her. "You can." Eleanor's voice rose a fraction. "No, I cannot. I don't know how to speak like them. I don't know how to sit properly. I don't know the rules." "You will be taught," he said. Eleanor shook her head. "They will see. They will see at once that I am not a born lady," he finished. Eleanor's cheeks burned. "Yes." The prince's voice was quiet. "They see what they want to see. If I stand beside you, they will call you what I say you are. They will resent it, but they will obey it." Eleanor stared at him. She could not decide if that was arrogance or truth. She whispered, "And if I make a mistake?" The prince said, "Then you will learn not to make the same mistake twice." His certainty frightened her. It also steadied her in a strange way, as if he were offering a railing over a steep drop. Eleanor forced herself to ask, "Will I be required to be alone with you?" The prince's eyebrows drew together slightly. "No," he said it firmly, almost offended she had to ask. "The contract includes chaperonage," he added. "You will not be placed in a position that could be misinterpreted." Eleanor's shoulders loosened by the smallest degree. "And," he said, "you will be treated with respect while you fulfill your role." Eleanor let out a breath she had been holding. Respect was not something she expected to be promised. She did not know whether to believe it. Behind the prince, within the room, she heard Mr. Ashcombe's voice again, faint but insistent. "Your Highness, we must—" The prince did not turn. He raised a hand slightly, silencing the voice without words. His eyes stayed on Eleanor. "Take the paper," he said. Eleanor hesitated. The corridor seemed to press in. The house felt enormous around her, and yet she had never felt so cornered. Her fingers went to her apron pocket. The silver thimble touched her skin, a small circle of metal, a reminder that survival came from small choices made firmly. She reached for the document. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the paper. The prince did not pull away. He let her take it as though it truly belonged to her decision. The weight of it surprised her. It was not a casual note. It had the heft of something prepared by lawyers and approved by cold minds. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. The first lines were formal, almost unreadable in their stiffness. Names, dates, agreements, conditions. It named her as Eleanor Hart, called her party of the second part, and then in ink that felt sharper than the rest, it stated the role she would assume. Eleanor's eyes moved slowly over the words. The prince watched her, unreadable. You can read it fully, he said. Take your time. Eleanor almost smiled at the irony. Mrs. Pritchard had shamed her for not reading a name. Now the prince was giving her a document and insisting she read. She read. Her mind snagged on phrases. A fixed term of 3 months. Training to be provided with attendance required. Public appearances to be managed by the prince's household. A promise of payment at the conclusion, contingent upon discretion. Chaperonage required. No private correspondence to be sent without approval. Eleanor swallowed. That last line felt like a leash. Her hands trembled. This is very thorough. It must be, the prince said. Eleanor lifted her eyes. Why did you already have this prepared? The prince did not flinch. Because I knew I would need an answer quickly. From me? She whispered. He paused. Then he said, from someone. Eleanor's throat tightened again. She was not special. She was convenient. She knew it, and yet the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she had never been seen. She forced herself back to the page. At the bottom was a line for her signature. Eleanor stared at it a long moment. I don't sign things, she said quietly. The prince's voice was even. You sign your wages. That's different, Eleanor said. How? He asked. She searched for words. Because wages are expected. This is dangerous. The prince nodded, as if that were the first sensible observation anyone had offered him. Yes. Eleanor's voice shook. If it goes wrong, I will be ruined. The prince said, if you stay in your place, you may also be ruined, only more slowly and with less money. Eleanor's eyes stung again, not tears this time. Anger. At him for speaking truth so plainly, at the world for making it so. She looked at her hands. She imagined those hands holding coins enough to rent a small room, to buy bread without counting crumbs, to choose a life that did not depend on someone else's mood. She looked up at the prince. Do you promise, she said, that when it ends, you will let me go without punishing me for it? The prince's gaze sharpened. I will not punish you for fulfilling an agreement I asked you to make. That is not the same as a promise, Eleanor said. The prince held her gaze, and for a moment, the corridor was quiet enough that she could hear her own breath. Then he said, I give you my word. Eleanor's heart squeezed painfully. A prince's word. What was it worth? To him, perhaps everything. To the court, perhaps nothing. She lowered her eyes again. And if the court insists on another bride? The prince's voice turned colder, not toward her, but toward the unseen world behind the walls. Then I will manage the court. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. You sound as if you can manage anything. The prince's mouth tightened. No, I can only manage appearances. That is why I am asking you. Eleanor looked down at the signature line. Her hand moved slowly toward her apron pocket. She pulled out a small pencil stub she used for inventory marks. It was humble. It felt absurdly out of place against such a document. The prince watched her, and she sensed a tension in him that he refused to show. Eleanor pressed the pencil to the paper. Her name looked small on the thick page. Eleanor Hart. She felt as she wrote it, as if she was stepping off a familiar ledge. When she finished, her hand hovered, trembling. The prince extended his hand, not to touch her, only to receive the paper. Eleanor folded the document carefully and placed it into his palm. He held it as though it was something fragile. For the first time, his voice softened. You have just changed your life. Eleanor let out a shaky breath. Or ended it. The prince's eyes narrowed slightly. No, he said. not ended. From inside the room, the woman's voice rose again. Thomas, this is foolish. The prince turned his head toward the room. I have decided. Mr. Ashcombe's voice followed, sharp with disapproval. Your Highness, with respect, you cannot simply— I can, the prince said. Eleanor stood very still, her heart pounding. The world seemed to be moving without her permission, and she was caught in it. The prince looked back at her. Mrs. Pritchard will be told that you have been reassigned. Eleanor blinked. Reassigned? Yes, he said. You will be removed from ordinary service duties immediately. You will be placed under instruction. Eleanor's throat tightened. They will notice. They will, he agreed. And they will talk, Eleanor whispered. They already talk, the prince replied. Eleanor's fingers found her thimble again, rubbing it through fabric. The prince stepped back slightly, making space, as if to remind the corridor of propriety again. Go, he said. Someone will come for you within the hour. Eleanor hesitated. Your Highness. He lifted his eyebrows. What if I fail? She asked. The prince's voice was steady. Then you will have done something braver than staying where you were told to stay. Eleanor's throat closed. She nodded once because she could not speak. She turned and walked away. Her knees felt weak. Her back felt too straight. Every servant she passed seemed to glance at her a beat too long, as if sensing that something had shifted. At the linen's alcove, she retrieved her stack. She needed an excuse to be moving. She needed something to hold so her hands would not betray her shaking. Halfway down the passage, she heard someone call her name. Miss Hart. Eleanor stopped and turned. A young lady's maid stood there, one Eleanor had seen before near the upper floors. Her cap was crisp. Her expression was unreadable. You are to come with me, the maid said. Eleanor's heart lurched. Now? Yes, the maid replied. There are arrangements. Eleanor followed. They did not go toward the servants' hall. They went upward, to a quieter corridor where the carpet softened footsteps and made Eleanor feel as if she were trespassing even with permission. She kept her gaze low. She did not want to see too much. The maid opened a door and gestured inside. In. Eleanor stepped into a small room with a chair and a mirror and a table laid with combs, pins, and folded fabric. A woman stood by the window, older than Eleanor, wearing plain but finer clothing than a servant's uniform. Her posture suggested authority that did not need to shout. She turned. Eleanor Hart. Eleanor swallowed. Yes, ma'am. The woman studied her face like she was deciding how much work would be required. I am Mrs. Wynne. You will do as I say when I say it. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Eleanor said quickly. Mrs. Wynne nodded once. Good. Sit. Eleanor sat. Mrs. Wynne took a cloth measure from the table. You will be measured. You will be taught to speak clearly. You will learn to enter a room without apologizing for it. Eleanor's stomach twisted. I don't know if I can. Mrs. Wynne's eyes sharpened. You will. The lady's maid closed the door softly behind them and took up a comb. Eleanor stared at her own reflection in the mirror. Her face looked the same. Her eyes looked larger, too alert. Her mouth looked like it was trying not to tremble. Mrs. Wynne said, Give me the document. Eleanor blinked. I gave it to the prince. Mrs. Wynne's expression did not change. Then you have a copy. Eleanor's heart stumbled. A copy? Mrs. Wynne gestured to the table. It was left for you. Eleanor turned her head. There on the table lay the same thick paper, folded neatly, her signature already in place on the final page, as if the household had anticipated her need to be bound twice over. Her fingers went cold. Mrs. Wynne said, Pick it up. Eleanor stood, walked to the table and lifted the document with careful hands. Read, Mrs. Wynne instructed. Eleanor unfolded it again, eyes scanning the lines she had already seen, searching for something she had missed. And then she saw it. Near the end, in smaller writing, was a clause that made her breath catch. If her identity became inconvenient to the Crown, the agreement could be terminated without notice, and she would be required to disappear from royal view at once. Eleanor's eyes moved over the clause again, as if staring could undo it. Mrs. Wynne watched her without softness. Read it aloud. Eleanor's throat tightened. If the party of the second part is deemed unsuitable by reason of identity, past association or public inconvenience, The agreement may be terminated without notice, and the party of the second part must remove herself from royal service and society immediately. Mrs. Wynne nodded. Good, you see it. Eleanor's fingers trembled on the paper. So if they decide they do not like me, I lose everything. You lose what you have gained, Mrs. Wynne corrected, and you return to what you had. That is nothing, Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Wynne's tone remained flat. Then you understand the stakes. The lady's maid behind Eleanor began to comb her hair with brisk, practiced motions. Eleanor swallowed. Why would anyone agree to such a thing? Mrs. Wynne leaned closer, her voice lowering as if sharing a secret. Because there are worse contracts in this world than ink on paper. Some are made with hunger. Some are made with fear. Eleanor's eyes stung. Am I to be dismissed the moment someone whispers? Mrs. Wynne straightened. You are to behave so well that whispers sound foolish. That is impossible, Eleanor said. Mrs. Wynne's gaze sharpened. It is difficult, not impossible. Eleanor looked at her reflection. Her cheeks were pale. Her lips were pressed tight, trying not to quiver. Mrs. Wynne held out her hand. Give it to me. Eleanor hesitated. The copy? Yes. Eleanor folded the document and placed it in Mrs. Wynne's hand. Mrs. Wynne tucked it away as if it were a handkerchief. Now you will stop reading, and you will start learning. Eleanor's voice came out thin. Learning what, ma'am? How to survive a room that smiles at you while it searches for a reason to send you away, Mrs. Wynne said. The comb tugged slightly at a knot and Eleanor winced. The maid murmured, Still. Eleanor held still. Mrs. Wynne walked around her like a schoolmistress deciding where to begin. First, your posture. Eleanor tried to straighten more. Mrs. Wynne tapped her shoulder lightly. Not stiff. If you look stiff, they will know you are bracing. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Mrs. Wynne said, Second, your voice. Say your name. Eleanor's mouth went dry. Eleanor Hart. Mrs. Wynne's chin lifted. No. Again. Eleanor swallowed. Lady Eleanor. Mrs. Wynne nodded. Better. Now say it as if you are not asking permission to exist. Eleanor tried again. Lady Eleanor. Mrs. Wynne's eyes narrowed. What is your father's name? Eleanor froze. Ma'am. Mrs. Wynne waited. Eleanor's fingers curled in her lap. I don't have... Mrs. Wynne cut her off. You have a story now. You will use it. Eleanor's voice trembled. Is it a lie? Mrs. Wynne's expression did not change. It is a shield, Eleanor whispered. What story? Mrs. Wynne pulled a small card from her pocket and read from it. Lady Eleanor is a distant relation of a respectable family abroad. She has been under quiet guardianship. She has returned recently and has been introduced under the prince's patronage. Eleanor blinked. A relation to whom? To no one who will contradict it, Mrs. Wynne said. Eleanor's throat tightened. And if they ask for names? They will, Mrs. Wynne replied. You will say what I teach you to say. Eleanor stared at her hands. This is madness. Mrs. Wynne's voice softened just a fraction. It is the palace. The door opened again. Another maid entered carrying a simple day dress that was finer than Eleanor had ever worn, along with gloves, shoes, and a small box. The maid set the box down and said, From His Highness. Mrs. Wynne opened the box. Inside lay a plain, delicate ring. Not a jeweled crown of a thing, only a small band with a single modest stone. Eleanor's breath caught. That is, for me. Mrs. Wynne's eyes flicked up. For Lady Eleanor. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. The ring looked too clean for her hands. Mrs. Wynne lifted it with care. Hold out your hand. Eleanor's fingers shook as she extended them. Mrs. Wynne slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as though measured. The lady's maid behind Eleanor murmured, It suits. Eleanor looked at the mirror again. The ring was small, but it changed the way her hand looked. It looked claimed. Mrs. Wynne said, You will wear it in public. You will not fidget with it. You will not hide it. Eleanor swallowed. What if I drop it? Mrs. Wynne's gaze turned sharp again. Then you will not drop it. Eleanor managed a quiet, strained, Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Wynne stepped back. Now, stand. Eleanor rose. Mrs. Wynne circled her again. Walk to the door. Eleanor walked. Stop, Mrs. Wynne said. Eleanor stopped. Turn, Mrs. Wynne said. Eleanor turned. Mrs. Wynne nodded once, as if Eleanor were a piece of furniture being placed correctly. Again, and do not look at the floor. Eleanor's eyes lifted instinctively, then wanted to fall again. She forced them forward, to the wall, to the door, to a point that did not feel like staring. Mrs. Wynne said, "Good. You will practice until your body obeys without thought." Eleanor's stomach churned. "How long do I have before I must be seen?" Mrs. Wynne answered without hesitation. 4 days. Eleanor's breath caught. 4. Yes. That is not enough, Eleanor whispered. It must be, Mrs. Wynne replied, because His Highness has decided to introduce you at Lady Pembroke's musical evening. Eleanor blinked. A musical evening. A gathering, Mrs. Wynne said, small enough to be controlled, large enough to be noticed. Eleanor's knees felt weak. They will speak to me. They will hunt you, Mrs. Wynne corrected, with compliments. Eleanor tried to breathe. And His Highness will be there. He will, Mrs. Wynne said. And you will not cling to him like a frightened child. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I won't. Mrs. Wynne's eyebrow lifted. Would you like to repeat that with conviction? Eleanor swallowed. I won't. Mrs. Wynne nodded. Good. The next 4 days passed in a blur of instructions and corrections that felt like waves that never stopped striking. Your chin, Mrs. Wynne would say, not so high. They will think you are challenging them. Your shoulders, she would say, loose. You are not carrying coal. Eleanor would flush and try again. A dancing master came one afternoon, a thin man with quick hands and a quick voice. Your Highness wishes you not to step on anyone important, he said brightly, as if it were a joke. Eleanor tried not to look as frightened as she felt. I will do my best, sir. That is not the phrase, Mrs. Wynne snapped from a chair in the corner. She will say, I shall be delighted. Eleanor repeated it. I shall be delighted. The dancing master smiled. Better. Now your hand. Eleanor lifted her hand. He placed her fingers on his sleeve with professional distance. Lightly, my lady. You are not gripping a rail in a storm. Eleanor wanted to say, I am. She did not. She moved through the steps, stiff at first, then less stiff, as her body learned that if she did not think too much, she could follow the pattern. When she made a mistake, the dancing master did not scold. He simply said, Again. Mrs. Wynne scolded enough for everyone. On the second day, Eleanor was told to speak and speak and speak again. A book of phrases was placed in her hands. Mrs. Wynne stood before her like an interrogator. What do you say if a duchess praises your gown? Mrs. Wynne asked. Eleanor hesitated. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Wynne made a sound of disapproval. Too plain. Too servant-like. Again. Eleanor tried. You are most kind. Better, Mrs. Wynne said. Now what do you say if she asks where you learned such taste? Eleanor's mouth went dry. I do not know. Mrs. Wynne's eyes sharpened. You say, I have been fortunate in my guardianship. Eleanor repeated it. Mrs. Wynne nodded. Now what do you say if she asks who your guardians were? Eleanor's heart hammered. Mrs. Wynne waited. Eleanor whispered, I have been fortunate in my guardianship. Mrs. Wynne leaned closer. And nothing more. Eleanor looked away. That feels like lying. Mrs. Wynne's voice was low. It feels like survival. On the third day the prince appeared. Not in the servants' corridor, not in the place where Eleanor expected to be invisible. He came to the instruction room, announced by a soft knock. Eleanor rose so quickly her chair scraped. Mrs. Wynne stood at once. Your Highness. Thomas entered with quiet authority. He looked from Mrs. Wynne to Eleanor. His gaze paused on the ring, then lifted to her face. You have begun, he said. Eleanor's throat tightened. Yes, Your Highness. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than necessary, not improper, just deliberate. Mrs. Wynne said briskly, She is learning quickly. Thomas's mouth twitched, as if he almost smiled and thought better of it. Quickly is relative. Mrs. Wynne's back stiffened. The evening is soon. I am aware, Thomas said. Then he addressed Eleanor directly. Are you eating? Eleanor blinked, startled by the question. Yes, Your Highness. Mrs. Wynne's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she resented any question that was not about etiquette. Thomas's voice stayed calm. "Do not faint in a drawing room. It would amuse the wrong people." Eleanor's cheeks warmed. "I will try not to faint." "Do not try," he said. "Decide." Eleanor drew a breath. "I will not faint." Thomas nodded once. "Good." He stepped closer, still keeping proper distance. "Has anyone been unkind?" Mrs. Wynne answered quickly. "No one has had the opportunity." Thomas's eyes remained on Eleanor. "Answer." Eleanor's fingers curled against her skirt. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to complain about every correction, every look, every whispered laugh she had imagined behind doors. But complaining felt dangerous. It felt childish. "No," she said softly. "Not unkind. Only strict." Thomas's gaze softened slightly. "Strictness is not always cruelty." Eleanor surprised herself by saying, "Sometimes it feels the same." Mrs. Wynne made a small horrified sound. Thomas did not look offended. He only looked thoughtful. "You are allowed to feel that," he said, "but you must not show it where it will be used against you." Eleanor swallowed. "Yes, Your Highness." Thomas glanced at Mrs. Wynne. "Leave us for a moment." Mrs. Wynne hesitated. "Your Highness, there must be a door," Thomas said evenly. "And it is open. Go." Mrs. Wynne pressed her lips together, curtsied, and stepped out. The lady's maid followed, leaving the door open, just as Thomas had said. Eleanor stood very still, aware of the hallway beyond, the possibility of ears. Thomas lowered his voice. "You read the clause." Eleanor's breath caught. "Yes, it is there to protect the crown," he said. "To discard me," Eleanor replied before she could stop herself. Thomas's jaw tightened. "It is there to prevent scandal. And if someone creates scandal," Eleanor said, "I will pay for it." Thomas's gaze held hers. "That is why you must be careful." Eleanor's voice trembled. "I am careful every day of my life." Thomas stared at her for a moment, then said quietly, "I know." The simple statement made her throat tighten in a way she did not understand. Thomas took a breath. "If you want to withdraw, you may." Eleanor blinked. "May I?" "Yes," he said. "But you will be dismissed quietly, and you will not receive the final payment." Eleanor's hands clenched. "Then I cannot withdraw." Thomas watched her. "You could." Eleanor's voice was low. "Not if I wish to eat." Thomas's eyes flickered, and something like anger moved beneath his composure. Not anger at her. Anger at a world that put hunger into contracts. He said, "Very well." Eleanor forced herself to ask, "Why are you doing this, truly?" Thomas's gaze sharpened. "I told you. To gain time," Eleanor said. "Yes, but why me?" Thomas was silent for a beat. Then he said, "Because you looked at me the other day and told me I sounded unhappy." Eleanor blinked. "That was not, it was honest," he said, "and honesty is rare in my life." Eleanor's cheeks warmed. "Honesty is dangerous." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Yes." He stepped back slightly, as if he had come too close to something he could not afford. "I will see you at Lady Pembroke's," he said. "Remember what Mrs. Wynne teaches you." Eleanor's voice came out small. "And if I forget?" Thomas's gaze held hers. "Look at me," he said. "If you are lost, look at me." Eleanor swallowed. "Yes, Your Highness." Thomas turned to go, then paused at the doorway. He looked back once. "Lady Eleanor," he said, testing the name in his mouth. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "Your Highness." He nodded and left. After he was gone, Mrs. Wynne returned, eyes sharp. "What did he say?" Eleanor's fingers touched the ring without thinking. Mrs. Wynne snapped. "Do not fidget with it." Eleanor dropped her hand. "He said to follow your teaching." Mrs. Wynne studied her. "And did you behave like a maid?" Eleanor bristled. "I behaved like myself." Mrs. Wynne's eyes narrowed. "That will not do in a drawing room." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Then teach me to behave like someone they will not destroy." Mrs. Wynne stared. Then slowly, she nodded once. "At last," she murmured. A spine. On the fourth day, Eleanor was dressed. The gown was simple, not ostentatious. That was Mrs. Wynne's decision, not Eleanor's. "If you appear too grand, Mrs. Wynne said, fastening a button, "they will say you are grasping." "And if I appear too plain?" Eleanor asked. They will say you are presumptuous, Mrs. Wynne replied. Eleanor exhaled. So there is no correct way. Mrs. Wynne's hands paused. There is no safe way, only a way with fewer knives. Eleanor did not like that word, even used as a metaphor, but she did not argue. A carriage was arranged. When Eleanor stepped into it, she felt as if she were stepping into someone else's life and closing the door behind her. Mrs. Wynne sat opposite her, posture unyielding. "Do not press your face to the window," she said at once. "I wasn't going to," Eleanor replied. Mrs. Wynne lifted her chin. "Do not speak unless spoken to." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "If I am asked a question, I must speak." Mrs. Wynne nodded sharply. "Then speak with restraint." Eleanor stared at her gloved hands. The gloves felt like a lie. The ring felt like a claim she had not earned. The carriage's quiet felt like the pause before a storm. When they arrived, the footman opened the door. Eleanor's stomach turned as she stepped down. Inside, the house was bright with voices and music. Eleanor did not look around too much. She did not want to appear hungry for spectacle. Mrs. Wynne's voice was low. "Remember, slow breath, soft smile, not too much." Eleanor's lips moved into the practiced expression, gentle and controlled. It did not feel like her face. Then Thomas appeared. He moved through the space with ease that looked effortless and cost him nothing. But Eleanor, watching, sensed the discipline beneath it. He approached, and the conversation near them shifted like wind turning. His gaze went to Eleanor's face. For a moment, his eyes softened. "Lady Eleanor," he said, offering his arm. Eleanor placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve, just as she had been taught. "Your Highness," she murmured. He leaned slightly closer, careful to keep it proper. "Do not look at the floor." Eleanor's eyes lifted. There were faces, so many faces, smiles that did not reach eyes, fans moving like slow wings, voices that seemed too polished to be real. Thomas guided her forward. A woman approached with a warm expression that felt like it belonged in a kinder world. "Thomas," she said. "You are late." Thomas inclined his head. "Lady Pembroke." Lady Pembroke's eyes went to Eleanor, then to the ring, then to Eleanor's face again. She smiled. "And you have brought us a surprise." Thomas's voice was calm. "May I present Lady Eleanor?" Lady Pembroke held out her hand. Eleanor curtsied as taught. "Charmed," Lady Pembroke said, and her tone sounded genuinely curious rather than cruel. "I hope you will forgive us if we stare a little. The season is hungry for novelty." Eleanor managed the phrase Mrs. Wynne had drilled. "You are most kind." Lady Pembroke laughed softly. "Oh, excellent. You have manners. That will frustrate half the room." Eleanor blinked, startled. Thomas's mouth twitched again, almost a smile. "Pembroke." Lady Pembroke patted his arm. "Go on. I will not devour her. I only want to see if she devours the room." Thomas's gaze moved to Eleanor. "If you need anything, tell me." Eleanor's voice was careful. "Yes, Your Highness." He guided her into the gathering. At first it seemed manageable. Small talk came in waves, and Eleanor caught them with practiced phrases. A lady with pearls asked, "How long have you been in town, Lady Eleanor?" Eleanor answered, "Only recently." "And where have you been?" the lady pressed, smiling. Eleanor held her smile. "Under quiet guardianship." The lady blinked, then laughed as if amused. "How mysterious." A gentleman with a smooth voice asked, "Do you ride, my lady?" "A little," Eleanor said. "Where?" he asked quickly. Eleanor's mind raced. Mrs. Wynne's voice echoed in her head. Nothing more. She smiled. "I have been fortunate in my guardianship." The gentleman looked momentarily puzzled. Then he bowed and moved on as if Eleanor were not worth the effort. Eleanor exhaled softly, keeping her face composed. Thomas stayed near her, close enough to signal protection, far enough to suggest she was not clinging. He spoke to others, calm, controlled. Eleanor answered questions. She smiled. She held herself upright. She remembered not to fidget with the ring. Then the Duchess of Harrow appeared. Eleanor did not know her at first. She only sensed the shift. People made space. Smiles sharpened. The Duchess was not loud. She did not need to be. Her presence carried authority like a scent. Thomas inclined his head. "Your Grace." The Duchess's gaze moved to Eleanor with slow, deliberate interest. "So, this is the young lady." Thomas's voice was steady. "Lady Eleanor, the Duchess of Harrow." Eleanor curtsied. "Your Grace." The Duchess studied her as if reading a page. "How very sudden." Thomas's tone remained polite. "Life is full of surprises." The Duchess smiled. It was not kind. "Indeed. And where did you find her, Thomas?" Eleanor's heart stumbled. "Find her? Like an object?" Thomas's voice stayed even. "Lady Eleanor has been introduced under my patronage." The Duchess's eyes did not leave Eleanor. "How fortunate for her." Eleanor kept her smile. "I am grateful, Your Grace." "Grateful," the Duchess repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, gratitude is a sensible habit." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but she held her posture. The Duchess tilted her head. "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, who was your governess?" Eleanor's mind went blank for a fraction. Then she remembered. "Answer without detail." "I have been fortunate in my guardianship," Eleanor said. The Duchess laughed softly. "That phrase again." Eleanor's smile strained. The Duchess's voice remained light. "Surely you can tell me one simple name." Eleanor felt the room lean in, eager for her to slip. Thomas spoke. "Calm, Your Grace. You overwhelm her." The Duchess turned her gaze to Thomas. "Do I? Or do you fear what she might say?" Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "I fear only rudeness." The Duchess's smile widened. "Rudeness in my presence, how amusing." She turned back to Eleanor. "Very well. If not a governess, then perhaps a clergyman. Who taught you your prayers, Lady Eleanor?" Eleanor's throat tightened. She could not repeat the phrase again without sounding like a parrot. She needed something else, something safe. She drew a slow breath. "My prayers were taught with care, Your Grace." The Duchess's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" Eleanor's heart hammered. She could feel Mrs. Wynne's training like a tight collar. "Say nothing more. Give no names. Names could be checked. Names could be used to tear her apart." Eleanor held the Duchess's gaze for a heartbeat longer than she would have as a maid. Then she said softly, "By those responsible for my upbringing." The Duchess's smile returned, thin as paper. "Responsible," she repeated. How vague. Eleanor's fingers wanted to curl. She forced them to remain still. The Duchess leaned slightly closer. "You will forgive me. I have an interest in the women who come near the throne. We must protect Thomas from confusion." Thomas's voice turned colder. "I do not require protection from women, Your Grace." The Duchess's eyes glittered. "All men do, especially men who are tender-hearted." Thomas's mouth tightened. Eleanor sensed the trap. The Duchess was pressing him as much as her. Eleanor spoke, her voice gentle. "Your Grace is most considerate." The Duchess turned her gaze back to Eleanor. "Considerate," she said. "Yes, that is what I am." She lifted a hand, and a servant offered her a glass. The Duchess sipped, then said, "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, do you play?" Eleanor blinked. "Play, Your Grace?" "The pianoforte, the harp." "Something," the Duchess said, as if the question were not a question but a requirement. Eleanor's heart sank. Mrs. Wynne had not taught her to play anything. There had not been time. There had not been money in Eleanor's old life for lessons. Eleanor's mouth went dry. Thomas moved half a step closer. The Duchess watched, pleased. Eleanor forced herself to answer with what truth she could afford. "I have not had the opportunity to practice much, Your Grace." The Duchess's eyebrows lifted. "How unfortunate." Thomas spoke quickly, smooth. "Lady Eleanor has spent much of her time abroad. She has been occupied with matters of family." The Duchess's gaze stayed on Eleanor. "Family," she echoed. "How interesting. Which family, precisely?" Eleanor felt the room tighten around her. Thomas's voice remained calm. "The sort of family that values privacy." The Duchess laughed softly, and several others laughed with her, too quickly, too obediently. Eleanor kept her smile. The Duchess looked Eleanor up and down once more, then said, "Well, you are pretty enough. That will carry you through certain rooms." Eleanor's cheeks burned. Thomas's voice was controlled. "Your Grace." The Duchess waved a hand. "Oh, do not be so stiff. I am paying her a compliment." Eleanor heard herself speak before caution could stop her. "I appreciate your candor, Your Grace." A brief silence. The Duchess's eyes narrowed with interest, as if Eleanor had surprised her. Then the Duchess smiled again. "Candor," she repeated. "Yes. Keep it small, Lady Eleanor. Candor is charming in moderation." She turned away, drifting toward another group as if she had not just tried to peel Eleanor open in public. Eleanor's breath trembled. She kept her expression calm until the Duchess was out of immediate reach. Then she let out a slow exhale. Thomas's voice was low, meant only for her. "You did well." Eleanor's eyes flicked up. "Did I?" "Yes," he said. "You did not give her what she wanted." Eleanor's throat tightened. What did she want? Thomas's mouth tightened. A weakness. A name. Something she could hold up and say, "Look." Eleanor swallowed. "I felt like a mouse under glass." Thomas's gaze softened slightly. "Most of them are. They simply pretend they are not." Eleanor's fingers brushed the ring again, and she stopped herself instantly, hearing Mrs. Wynne's voice in her head. Thomas watched her hands. Then he looked away, scanning the room as if measuring threats. A sudden bright voice cut through the hum. "Thomas!" Eleanor turned. A young woman approached with graceful certainty, as if the room belonged to her by birthright. Her gown was elegant without effort. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes, however, were not smiling at all. Thomas inclined his head. Lady Beatrice. So this was the name Eleanor had heard through the half-open door. The court's chosen solution. Lady Beatrice's gaze slid to Eleanor's hand, to the ring, then to Eleanor's face. Her smile widened slightly. "How enchanting," Beatrice said. "You've kept us all in suspense." Thomas's tone was polite. "I did not intend suspense." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "It follows you nonetheless." She extended her hand to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, is it? How lovely to finally meet you." Eleanor took the offered hand with careful grace. "Lady Beatrice." Beatrice's fingers were cool and light. Her grip was not unkind. It was controlled, as if she were testing Eleanor's bones. Beatrice said softly, "You must forgive me. I had begun to think Thomas had no interest in marriage at all." Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "Beatrice." Beatrice smiled at him. "Yes?" Thomas's voice remained even. "Do not speak as though I am not present." Beatrice's smile did not change. "But you are present. That is the surprise." She turned her gaze back to Eleanor. "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, did you grow up in the country?" Eleanor answered carefully. "I have spent time in quiet places." Beatrice nodded as if pleased. "Quiet places produce quiet women." Eleanor kept her smile. "Sometimes." Beatrice leaned slightly closer, her voice sweet. "And sometimes quiet women are very clever indeed." Eleanor's stomach tightened. It was not praise. It was a warning dressed as praise. Beatrice straightened. "You look composed," she said. "It must be comforting to have Thomas beside you." Eleanor's mouth went dry. Comforting, as if Eleanor were a nervous child being led across a street. Thomas spoke, calm and controlled. "Lady Eleanor is perfectly capable without me." Beatrice's gaze slid to him. "Is she?" Thomas met her eyes. "Yes." Beatrice smiled again. How fortunate for her. The same phrase the Duchess had used. Eleanor felt the room closing in again. Beatrice's voice remained pleasant. "I hope you find the season enjoyable, Lady Eleanor. Society can be demanding." Eleanor's fingers curled under her glove. "So, I am learning." Beatrice's smile sharpened a fraction. "Learning is admirable. Some people never do." Eleanor held her gaze. "Some people do not need to." Beatrice blinked, then laughed softly. "Oh, you have spirit." Thomas's voice was quiet. "Beatrice." Beatrice looked at him with a fondness that felt like ownership. "Do not worry. I am not unkind, I am simply curious." She turned to Eleanor again. "I confess I do wonder where Thomas found you." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Before she could answer, Thomas spoke smoothly. "I found her where I wished to find her." Beatrice's eyebrows lifted. "And where is that?" Thomas's gaze did not waver. "Close enough." The air shifted. A few listeners smiled too brightly and turned away, pretending they had not heard the edge beneath his politeness. Beatrice's smile held. "How romantic," she said, though her eyes did not match the word. Eleanor's breath trembled. Beatrice's gaze flicked over Eleanor again. "You must allow me to introduce you to several ladies," she said. "They will be eager to meet you." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Eager meant hungry. Thomas's voice was calm. "Another time." Beatrice's smile stiffened. "Another time," she echoed. "Of course. We have so much time, do we not?" Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes." Beatrice's gaze slid back to Eleanor. "Enjoy your evening, Lady Eleanor." "And you," Eleanor said softly. Beatrice drifted away, leaving behind a faint chill that had nothing to do with weather. Eleanor let out a careful breath. Thomas's voice was low. "Do not engage her." Eleanor's eyes flicked up. "She engaged me." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Then answer politely and give her nothing." Eleanor's voice was quiet. "Nothing is all I have." Thomas looked at her for a beat. Then he said, "Not true." Eleanor's chest tightened. "Your Highness—" He cut her off gently. "Do not speak like that here." Eleanor swallowed. "Yes." Lady Pembroke approached again, fanning herself lightly. "Duchess Harrow has been circling," she murmured to Thomas. "She is displeased." Thomas's tone remained polite. "She is often displeased." Lady Pembroke's eyes flicked to Eleanor. "My dear, you handled her better than most seasoned women." Eleanor managed a soft smile. "Thank you, my lady." Lady Pembroke leaned closer to Eleanor, lowering her voice. "A word of advice. Do not appear too clever. It alarms them." Eleanor blinked. "If I appear foolish, will that be safer?" Lady Pembroke smiled. "Ah, you are clever. How unfortunate." Eleanor's cheeks warmed again. Thomas's mouth twitched. "Pembroke." Lady Pembroke laughed and moved away. The music began again, and conversation rose around them. Thomas offered his arm. "Walk." Eleanor placed her hand lightly, and they moved through the room. A lady with sharp eyes approached, pretending casualness. "Your Highness, might we know Lady Eleanor's family?" Thomas smiled in a way that was perfectly polite and perfectly empty. "Her family is private." The lady laughed lightly. "How modern." Thomas's voice stayed smooth. "How respectful." The lady blinked, then smiled more stiffly and withdrew. Eleanor's breath trembled. She whispered, "You make it sound easy." Thomas's voice was low. "It is not easy. It is practiced." Eleanor swallowed. "You saved me." Thomas's gaze flicked to her face. "I answered a question." Eleanor's voice tightened. "That is saving, in this room." Thomas did not deny it. They paused near a small cluster of ladies. Eleanor was introduced. She repeated the phrases. She smiled. She remembered not to look down. And still, she felt eyes on her. Measuring. Weighing. Waiting for a crack. A young woman with bright curiosity asked, "Do you know the Langfords well?" Eleanor's heart jumped. "The Langfords? Lady Beatrice," the young woman clarified with a giggle. "She is so beautiful, is she not?" Eleanor kept her smile. "She is very composed." The young woman leaned in. "And are you frightened of her?" Eleanor's smile remained. "I do not make a habit of fear." The young woman laughed, delighted, and drifted away. Eleanor's pulse hammered. Had she said too much? Thomas's hand, still offered as an escort, shifted slightly, steadying her without touching her skin. The simple adjustment felt like a reassurance. Eleanor whispered, "I am doing it wrong." Thomas murmured back, "You are doing it." That was not comfort, not exactly, but it was something. As the evening continued, Eleanor began to feel the rhythm. Questions came. She answered. Some smiled, some withdrew, some returned with sharper curiosity. The Duchess watched from across the room, a quiet predator behind cordial manners. Beatrice moved like a swan through groups, always perfect, always in control, always glancing toward Eleanor as if making notes. Eleanor's cheeks ached from smiling. At last, Thomas guided her toward a quieter corner, near a curtained doorway, still in sight of others. Eleanor breathed more freely. Thomas's voice was low. "You did not break." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Not yet." Thomas studied her face. "You look tired." Eleanor gave a soft, strained laugh. "I am tired." His gaze held hers, a beat too long for comfort, then shifted away as footsteps approached. A lady passed, then another. A servant offered a tray. Eleanor shook her head politely. Thomas said quietly, "Do you want to leave?" Eleanor blinked. "We can leave." Thomas's eyes flicked to the room. Soon. We must be seen long enough to make the point. Eleanor swallowed. And the point is that you have chosen. Thomas's voice was even. That I am not available to be managed. Eleanor's chest tightened at the word chosen. Before she could speak, a thin voice behind them said, "There she is." Eleanor turned slightly. Two women stood a short distance away, fans lifted. Their smiles were pleasant. Their eyes were not. One of them said softly to the other, as if Eleanor could not hear, "I am certain I have seen her before." The other replied, "Of course you have. Under another name, I suspect." Eleanor heard the whisper as if it had been spoken directly into her ear. "I am certain I have seen her before." "Of course you have. Under another name, I suspect." Her hand tightened on Thomas's sleeve before she remembered herself, and loosened it at once. She kept her smile. She kept her chin level. She did not look at the women who had said it. Looking would be acknowledgement. Acknowledgement would be an invitation. Thomas's voice, low and steady, reached her without turning his head. "Do not react." Eleanor barely moved her lips. "I didn't. You did," he murmured. "Only I noticed." Eleanor swallowed. "What do I do?" "Breathe," he said, "and look as though you have heard nothing." Eleanor drew a slow breath through her nose, the way Mrs. Wynne had drilled into her. She turned slightly, focusing her gaze on a harmless point, a vase, a curtain, anything that did not have eyes. The two women drifted closer anyway, fans fluttering as if their words were not sharp. One of them spoke directly now, her tone bright. "Your Highness." Thomas inclined his head. "Lady Caraway." "And you," the woman said, gaze sliding to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor." Eleanor gave the smallest curtsy that was permitted in such a close space. "Good evening." Lady Caraway smiled wider. "Oh, you have made quite an impression." Her companion, Lady Hensley, tilted her head. "It is rare to meet someone so new." Eleanor held her smile. "The season is full of surprises, I am told." Lady Hensley's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed. And where did you say you were raised?" Eleanor kept her voice gentle. "In quiet places." Lady Caraway laughed lightly. "Quiet places. How charmingly vague." Thomas's tone remained polite. "Ladies, you are monopolizing." Lady Hensley's smile sharpened. "We would never monopolize, Your Highness. We only wish to be properly acquainted with the woman who has captured your attention." Eleanor's cheeks warmed at that phrase, "captured your attention." It made her sound like a trick. Thomas did not look at Eleanor. He looked at them. "Acquaint yourselves another time." Lady Caraway lifted her fan. "Another time," she echoed, like Beatrice had. Lady Hensley's eyes slid to Eleanor's ring. "Yes. Time is such a flexible thing, isn't it?" Eleanor's fingers threatened to curl. She forced them still. Lady Caraway leaned closer, voice softened, meant to sound kind. "Forgive us. It is only that you resemble someone I once saw in service at my aunt's estate." Eleanor's breath caught. Thomas's voice was smooth. "Lady Caraway, you mistake her." Lady Caraway's smile held. "Do I?" Lady Hensley murmured. "One can hardly forget a face once seen from below stairs." Eleanor's stomach turned. Thomas's tone cooled. "That is enough." Lady Caraway's fan fluttered. "Of course, Your Highness. We would never imply anything improper." Lady Hensley's smile widened. "Never." They drifted away, leaving the air behind them taut. Eleanor's breath trembled as she let it out. Thomas spoke without looking at her. "Do not let them pull you apart with questions." Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "They already are." Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "Not if you do not give them something to hold." Eleanor swallowed. "I have nothing to give." Thomas turned his head a fraction. His gaze found hers, steady. "You have your composure. That is more than most of them possess." Eleanor's throat tightened, not with comfort, but with the odd ache of being taken seriously. Before she could reply, Lady Pembroke approached, her expression suddenly cautious. She did not smile as readily now. "Thomas," she said quietly, "Harrow is watching." Thomas's tone stayed polite. "Harrow always watches." Lady Pembroke's eyes flicked to Eleanor. "My dear, walk with me for a moment." Eleanor hesitated. "My lady." Thomas nodded once. "Go." Eleanor went with Lady Pembroke toward a small sitting alcove where the music was softer and the crowd thinner. Lady Pembroke lowered her voice. "They are circling you like a puzzle they want to solve." Eleanor kept her smile. "I can feel it." Lady Pembroke's gaze sharpened. "You must not look afraid." "I'm not sure I can manage that," Eleanor admitted. Lady Pembroke sighed. "Then look bored." Eleanor blinked. "Bored?" "Yes," Lady Pembroke said. "Fear invites them. Boredom insults them." Eleanor managed a small, strained laugh. "I don't know how to look bored in a room like this." Lady Pembroke studied her. "You truly have never been in rooms like this." Eleanor's mouth went dry. Lady Pembroke's expression softened. "Do not answer. I already know. And do not worry. I am not Harrow." Eleanor's voice was quiet. "Why are you helping me?" Lady Pembroke's lips pressed together. "Because I have watched young women be eaten alive in these gatherings while everyone pretends it is refinement." Eleanor swallowed. "They can do that?" "They can ruin you with a smile," Lady Pembroke replied, "and call it manners." Eleanor's fingers curled under her glove. "What do they want from me?" Lady Pembroke's eyes flicked toward the room. "They want to know whether you belong. And if you do not, they want the satisfaction of pushing you out." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And if I do belong?" Lady Pembroke gave a dry little laugh. "Then they want the satisfaction of resenting you." Eleanor nodded once, feeling the truth of it settle like weight. Lady Pembroke leaned in. "Tell me something. Do you love him?" Eleanor's breath caught. "My lady." Lady Pembroke's eyes narrowed. "Answer me." Eleanor's voice trembled. I cannot speak of such things." Lady Pembroke's tone softened. "Then let me ask differently. Does he treat you with respect?" Eleanor hesitated. Then, quietly, "Yes." Lady Pembroke nodded, satisfied. "Good. Hold on to that. It will be your anchor when the room tries to spin you." Eleanor looked back toward Thomas. He stood in conversation with Mr. Ashcombe now, their faces composed, their bodies angled as if the discussion were polite. Eleanor could tell it was not polite. Mr. Ashcombe's mouth was too tight. Thomas's shoulders were too still. Lady Pembroke followed her gaze. "Ashcombe will not like this arrangement." Eleanor's voice was small. "No one will." Lady Pembroke's eyes sharpened. "Not true. Some will enjoy it very much." Eleanor swallowed. "Who?" Lady Pembroke tilted her head. "Those who enjoy watching a fall." Eleanor drew a careful breath. "I will not fall." Lady Pembroke studied her, then nodded slowly. "Good. There it is again. That spine." Eleanor managed a soft, uncertain smile. Lady Pembroke touched her arm lightly. "Return to him now. Harrow has been waiting for you to separate. Do not reward her." Eleanor nodded. "Yes, my lady." She walked back toward Thomas, keeping her steps measured, her gaze forward. As she approached, she heard Mr. Ashcombe's voice, low and sharp. "This is becoming difficult to contain, Your Highness." Thomas replied evenly. "Contain what?" "The curiosity," Mr. Ashcombe said. "The questions, Harrow's interest." Thomas's tone stayed calm. "Harrow is not the crown." Mr. Ashcombe's eyes flicked to Eleanor as she came nearer, then back to Thomas. "Harrow speaks to the crown, and Lady Beatrice speaks to Harrow." Thomas's jaw tightened. Eleanor stopped just beside Thomas, a half step behind, where she had been taught to stand. Thomas acknowledged her presence with a slight shift, making space as if she were naturally part of his circle. Mr. Ashcombe inclined his head stiffly to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor." Eleanor replied softly, "Sir." Mr. Ashcombe looked back to Thomas. "We must speak privately." Thomas's voice was cool. "We are in public." Mr. Ashcombe lowered his voice further. "Then you should be especially careful." Thomas's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Careful of what?" Mr. Ashcombe's gaze flicked again to Eleanor, then away, as if he did not wish to say her name. "Careful of unpleasant histories." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Thomas's voice did not change. "Do you have facts, or do you have gossip?" Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. "In this world, gossip becomes fact if repeated by the right people." Thomas's gaze held his. "Then do not become the right people." Mr. Ashcombe's expression hardened. "Your Highness." Thomas cut him off with quiet finality. "Enough." Mr. Ashcombe bowed stiffly and withdrew into the crowd. Eleanor's breath trembled. She kept her expression calm, though her hands felt cold. Thomas turned his head slightly toward her. "Do not listen to him," Eleanor managed. "I can't help hearing." Thomas's voice was low. "Then hear me instead." Eleanor looked up before she could stop herself. His eyes held hers, steady, controlled, and for a moment she forgot the room existed. Then a voice cut through the hum again, sweet as sugar. "Thomas!" Lady Beatrice approached, smiling as if she had never warned Eleanor with her eyes. She offered her hand to Thomas. He did not take it. He bowed instead. Beatrice's smile tightened for a fraction, then smoothed again. She turned to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, are you enjoying yourself?" Eleanor held her smile. "It is a lively evening." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Lively? Yes. It has become quite lively." Thomas's voice remained calm. Beatrice ignored the warning, still smiling. "Forgive me, I am only concerned. A new face can find these gatherings overwhelming." Eleanor kept her voice gentle. "I have been well guided." Beatrice's gaze flicked toward Mrs. Wynne, who stood at a distance, watchful. "Ah, guidance, how reassuring." Beatrice leaned slightly closer to Thomas, her voice lowered but not enough to be private. "Harrow is making inquiries." Thomas's tone stayed even. "Harrow can occupy herself." Beatrice's smile widened. "She has. She has found someone who claims to recognize Lady Eleanor." Eleanor's chest tightened. Thomas's eyes sharpened. "Who?" Beatrice's expression was innocent. "A housekeeper. Quite reliable, I am told. She served in a fine estate in Surrey." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Surrey. The old memory rose like a bruise pressed too hard. An estate corridor, a missing trinket, a whisper, a stare, a door closing, a voice saying, "It must have been her." Eleanor forced her face to remain calm. Thomas's gaze moved to Eleanor, quick and assessing. "Have you ever been in Surrey?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. Beatrice's smile sharpened slightly. "Pleased." Eleanor's voice came out soft. I have been in many places." Thomas's eyes narrowed, not in accusation but in attention. "Answer plainly." Eleanor's fingers curled under her gloves. Beatrice's voice was sweet. "Oh, Thomas, do not interrogate her. It is unkind." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I am not being unkind." Eleanor swallowed. "Yes," she said quietly. "I have been in Surrey." Beatrice gave a soft, delighted little laugh. "How wonderful. Then you will have so much to discuss with the housekeeper." Eleanor's stomach turned. Thomas's voice was calm, but the calmness felt like restraint under strain. "Where is this housekeeper?" Beatrice gestured lightly with her fan. "Near the refreshment table." Thomas's gaze held Beatrice's for a beat. "You arranged this." Beatrice's smile remained. "Arranged? No. I simply introduced two people who might know one another. Is that a crime?" "No," Thomas said. "It is a tactic." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Everything in this world is a tactic." Thomas looked away, jaw tight. Beatrice smiled at Eleanor. "Come, Lady Eleanor, let us see if you are truly as mysterious as you pretend." Eleanor felt her knees weaken. She kept her posture. Thomas's voice was low. "You are not required to go." Beatrice's gaze snapped to him, still smiling. "Not required? Surely she has nothing to hide." Eleanor's throat tightened at the phrase "nothing to hide." It was a trap. Refuse and look guilty. Go and be tested. Eleanor lifted her chin slightly. "I will go." Thomas's gaze snapped to her. "Eleanor." He said her name too plainly, too personally. Eleanor's breath trembled. She corrected softly, "Your Highness." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Stay beside me." Beatrice's smile widened. "How protective. Come then, both of you." They moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Eyes followed. Whispering rose and then quieted, as if the room was holding its breath to see what would happen. At the refreshment table stood an older woman in service attire, neat and stiff, her hands folded. She did not look like a guest. She looked like someone brought in for a purpose. Beatrice approached first. "Mrs. Kell," she said warmly, "thank you for coming." The housekeeper curtsied stiffly. "My lady." Beatrice gestured toward Eleanor. This is Lady Eleanor. Mrs. Kell lifted her eyes. Eleanor's stomach dropped. The woman stared as if struck by a memory. Her mouth parted slightly. "No," Mrs. Kell whispered, then cleared her throat quickly. "Beg pardon." Beatrice's smile remained sweet. "Do you recognize her?" Thomas's voice cut in, controlled. "Beatrice." Beatrice tilted her head. "What?" "It is a simple question." Mrs. Kell's eyes remained locked on Eleanor. I believe I have seen her." Eleanor's breath caught. She forced her voice steady. "You are mistaken." Mrs. Kell shook her head slowly. "I never forget a face, my lady." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Where have you seen her?" Mrs. Kell's mouth tightened. "At Hartwell Manor. In Surrey." The room seemed to lean closer. Eleanor's ears rang. Thomas's voice was calm, but there was an edge under it. "Mrs. Kell, you are a housekeeper." "Yes, Your Highness." "And you served at Hartwell Manor," Thomas said. "Yes." Thomas inclined his head slightly. "Then you understand the importance of discretion." Mrs. Kell hesitated. "Your Highness, I mean no disrespect, but—" Beatrice interrupted smoothly. "You need not fear. We only wish to ensure there is no misunderstanding." Eleanor's fingers clenched. Thomas's gaze flicked to Beatrice. "Stop." Beatrice's smile stayed. "I am not speaking to you." Thomas's jaw tightened. Mrs. Kell looked at Eleanor again, her expression conflicted, as if she knew she was being used, but could not resist the satisfaction of being listened to. She said, "She was a housemaid. Her name was Nell." Eleanor's chest tightened. Nell. The old nickname. It struck too close, too intimate, too real. Beatrice gave a soft, pleased sound. "How interesting." Eleanor's voice came out firm. "My name is Eleanor." Mrs. Kell's eyes narrowed. "Nell, they called you. You worked in the West Wing. You were quiet, always quiet." Thomas's gaze sharpened. He spoke softly to Eleanor, so low only she could hear. "Tell me the truth." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Not here." Thomas's voice remained low. "Now." Eleanor forced herself to keep her expression composed. "I worked in service once," she whispered. "Yes." Thomas's eyes held hers. "And why did you leave?" Eleanor's breath caught. The answer was a cliff. Step wrong and fall. Beatrice's voice was sweet. "Yes, why?" Eleanor felt the room tightening around her like a net made of polite expectation. Mrs. Kell spoke before Eleanor could. "There was trouble," she said. "A piece of jewelry went missing. A brooch, small but valuable." Eleanor's vision blurred for a moment. She forced it clear. Mrs. Kell continued, voice gaining confidence as eyes turned toward her. "The mistress searched the house. She found nothing. But there were suspicions." Beatrice's smile was radiant. "Suspicions of what?" Mrs. Kell looked at Eleanor. "Suspicions of theft." A hush. Eleanor's cheeks burned so fiercely she thought the heat must show through her skin. Thomas's posture went still. He did not speak. That silence was worse than anger. Beatrice's voice was soft, almost sympathetic. "Oh, Lady Eleanor, how dreadful." Eleanor forced herself to breathe. She said clearly, "I did not steal anything." Mrs. Kell's eyes narrowed. "That is what you said then." Eleanor's voice trembled, but she held it. "And it is what I say now." Beatrice's smile softened. "Mrs. Kell, did anyone prove it?" Mrs. Kell hesitated. "No proof, my lady. Not in hand." Beatrice lifted her eyebrows. "Then perhaps it was only a misunderstanding." Mrs. Kell's mouth tightened. "She left soon after, my lady, and those who leave after questions are asked are rarely innocent." Eleanor's hands clenched so hard her fingers ached. Thomas spoke then, his voice controlled. "Mrs. Kell, you are making an accusation in a drawing room." Mrs. Kell looked startled. "Your Highness, I only—" Thomas cut her off. "You are not only. You are speaking, and your words carry weight, because others enjoy carrying them further." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Thomas, you are being unfair. She is only telling what she knows." Thomas turned his gaze to Beatrice, and Eleanor felt the tension sharpen. "And what do you know, Beatrice?" Beatrice blinked, smile still fixed. "I know nothing. That is why I asked." Thomas's jaw tightened. Eleanor swallowed hard. Her throat felt too small for breath. She spoke again, forcing clarity. "I was accused," she said. That is true, but I was not guilty. Mrs. Kell's eyes narrowed. Then why did you leave? Eleanor's voice came out low. Because once a household decides what it wishes to believe, a maid cannot argue it away. A murmur rose. Beatrice's smile sharpened. How articulate. Thomas's gaze flicked to Eleanor, steadying, then back to Mrs. Kell. Thank you, Mrs. Kell. You may return to your duties. Mrs. Kell hesitated, looking at Beatrice. Beatrice smiled kindly. Yes, thank you. You have been most helpful. Mrs. Kell curtsied stiffly and withdrew, slipping away like someone who had delivered a package and was now no longer needed. The air remained taut. Eleanor stood very still, her smile fixed, her heart pounding so hard she feared it would betray her. Thomas's voice was low, meant for her alone. Are you telling me the truth? Eleanor's eyes flicked up to his. Yes. Thomas held her gaze. Swear it. Eleanor's breath caught. I swear it. Thomas's jaw tightened. He did not look away. Beatrice watched them, pleased, as if she had succeeded in placing a wedge between them in a single breath. She said softly, How unfortunate. If the newspapers catch scent of such a story. Thomas's gaze snapped to her. Stop. Beatrice's smile remained. It is not my fault if others speak. Thomas's voice was calm, but colder now. It is your fault if you feed them. Beatrice's eyes glittered. You cannot keep everyone silent forever. Thomas's jaw tightened. Perhaps I can keep you silent. Beatrice's smile widened. You wouldn't dare. Thomas stared at her. Do not challenge me in public. Beatrice's expression did not change, but her eyes hardened. Then do not embarrass me in public. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Embarrass her, as if Beatrice had been wronged by Eleanor existing. A new voice cut in, sharp, with formal pleasantness. Your Highness. Mr. Ashcombe appeared, face composed, eyes too alert. Thomas's tone remained even. Ashcombe. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze flicked to Eleanor, then away as though she were suddenly a dangerous object. He lowered his voice. A word. Now. Thomas's jaw tightened. Later. Mr. Ashcombe's voice stayed polite, but urgent. Now. Thomas turned his head slightly to Eleanor. Do not move. Eleanor's throat tightened. Yes. Thomas stepped a few paces away with Mr. Ashcombe, not fully private, but far enough that their words became harder to catch. Eleanor could still hear fragments. Mr. Ashcombe, this is exactly what I warned you. Thomas. She said she is innocent. Mr. Ashcombe. Innocence is irrelevant if the story spreads. Thomas. I will not discard her because Harrow enjoys cruelty. Mr. Ashcombe. You will discard your own position if you defy the Crown. Thomas. I am not defying the Crown, I am delaying. Mr. Ashcombe. Delaying is defiance when the Crown has decided. Eleanor's hands went cold. She stood still as instructed, while the room watched her like a performance. Lady Pembroke approached quietly, face serious. My dear, she murmured. How are you standing? Eleanor's smile remained. On my feet. Lady Pembroke's eyes softened slightly. Yes, keep doing that. Eleanor swallowed. They think I'm a thief. Lady Pembroke's mouth tightened. They think whatever entertains them. Eleanor's voice trembled. Will he believe them? Lady Pembroke's gaze flicked to Thomas. He is trying not to. That answer was not comfort. Beatrice returned to Eleanor's side as if she belonged there. Her voice was sweet. You must not be distressed. Eleanor kept her smile. I am not. Beatrice's eyes glittered. Lying is exhausting, is it not? Eleanor's chest tightened. I am not lying. Beatrice's smile widened. Of course. Eleanor held her gaze for a heartbeat. You seem very certain for someone who says she knows nothing. Beatrice's eyebrows lifted. Careful, Lady Eleanor. Candour in moderation. Eleanor's fingers curled under her gloves. She forced them to stillness again. Yes, Lady Beatrice. Beatrice leaned closer, voice low. You should consider what a single rumour can do. Eleanor's breath trembled. I am considering it. Beatrice's smile softened into something almost pitying. Then you will understand why the Crown prefers certainty. Eleanor's voice came out steady. The Crown prefers control. Beatrice's eyes flashed. And you prefer what? A fairy tale? Eleanor's chest tightened. Fairy tale. She had never dared to want such things, not even as a child. She answered softly, "I prefer not to be destroyed." Beatrice's smile returned. "Then be wise. Know your place." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "My place is where I am standing." Beatrice's smile sharpened. "For now." Thomas returned. His face was composed. Too composed. His eyes held something heavy behind them. Mr. Ashcombe remained a step behind, expression tight. Beatrice turned toward Thomas with her flawless smile. "Thomas, everyone is watching." Thomas's voice was calm. "Let them." Mr. Ashcombe leaned closer to Thomas and murmured something Eleanor could not hear. Thomas's jaw tightened. Lady Pembroke approached again, her voice soft but firm. "Thomas, Harrow is moving." Across the room, the Duchess of Harrow began to glide toward them, her expression pleasant, her eyes gleaming with purpose. Eleanor's stomach turned. Thomas's voice was low to Eleanor. "Stay calm." Eleanor managed, "I am trying." Thomas's gaze held hers. "Do not let them see you pleading." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I am not pleading." Thomas nodded once, as if that mattered. The Duchess arrived with quiet certainty. "Thomas," she said warmly, "what an interesting little disturbance you've brought into Lady Pembroke's house." Thomas inclined his head. "Your Grace." The Duchess's gaze slid to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor." Eleanor curtsied. "Your Grace." The Duchess smiled. "I do hope you are not unwell. It would be a shame if the excitement overwhelmed you." Eleanor kept her voice gentle. "I am quite well." The Duchess's eyes glittered. "Good. Then you will not mind if I ask a few questions for the sake of reassurance." Thomas's voice was calm. "Your Grace, reassurance is not required." The Duchess smiled wider. "Ah, but it is. You see, when a prince presents a fiancé, it becomes a matter of national interest." Eleanor's breath caught. Beatrice's smile remained perfect. Mr. Ashcombe stood like a shadow. The Duchess continued, voice light. "Mrs. Kell has shared a story, an unfortunate one. I am sure it is a misunderstanding." Eleanor's fingers curled under her gloves. The Duchess's gaze stayed on Eleanor. "Is it a misunderstanding?" Eleanor's voice came out clear. "Yes, Your Grace." The Duchess tilted her head. "Then explain it." Eleanor swallowed. "I was accused I was not guilty. I left because remaining meant living under suspicion." The Duchess's smile turned thin. "How dramatic." Eleanor kept her posture. "It was my life." The Duchess's eyes narrowed with interest. "And what was your name at Hartwell Manor?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. Thomas spoke quickly. "Your Grace, this is inappropriate." The Duchess turned her gaze to Thomas. "Is it, or is it necessary?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "It is unkind." The Duchess's voice stayed sweet. "Unkindness is allowing a future scandal to bloom because everyone was too polite to uproot it early." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. The Duchess looked back to Eleanor. "Your name." Eleanor's fingers clenched. "Eleanor." The Duchess smiled. "They called you Nell." Eleanor's breath caught. Beatrice's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Lady Pembroke's face tightened with anger. Thomas's voice cut in, controlled. "Enough." The Duchess's smile widened. "Thomas, if you intend to proceed with this engagement, you cannot shelter her from questions." Thomas's voice was calm but edged. "I am not sheltering. I am setting boundaries." The Duchess's eyes hardened slightly. "Boundaries do not exist in public life." Thomas stared at her. "Then perhaps public life should learn to behave." A murmur ran through the room, half shock, half delighted hunger. The Duchess's smile did not move. "How noble!" Mr. Ashcombe leaned slightly toward Thomas, voice low. "Your Highness, please." Thomas did not look at him. The Duchess's gaze went to Mr. Ashcombe, then back to Thomas. "He is right. This has gone far enough. The Crown will not tolerate uncertainty." Thomas's jaw tightened. "The Crown is not here." The Duchess smiled. "No, but its will is." She lifted her voice slightly, just enough for others to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive this interruption. His Highness has been placed under terrible pressure of late, and we must all be gentle with him." Thomas's eyes flashed. Lady Pembroke stepped forward, voice sharp. "Your Grace, This is my house. The Duchess turned to her with a pleasant smile. And I am grateful for your hospitality. Lady Pembroke's fan snapped open. Then do not use it as a courtroom. The Duchess's smile remained. I am not judging. I am simply ensuring that the future Queen's household will not be embarrassed. Beatrice's smile deepened at the phrase future Queen. Eleanor's stomach turned. Thomas's voice went colder. There will be no embarrassment if people cease attempting to manufacture it. The Duchess looked at him, eyes bright. Then prove it. Announce your intentions clearly. Put an end to doubt. Thomas's jaw tightened. Mr. Ashcombe's voice was low and urgent. Your Highness, the moment is upon you. Eleanor's breath trembled. She looked at Thomas, searching his face for something she could hold. He did not look at her. Not yet. He stared forward, as if seeing the edge of a cliff he had been walking toward since the day he was born. Beatrice stepped closer, voice sweet. Thomas, everyone will be relieved if you simply do what is expected. Thomas's eyes flicked to Beatrice for a fraction, then away. Lady Pembroke's voice was quiet, aimed at Thomas alone. Do not let them force you. The Duchess smiled. No one is forcing, we are only waiting. The music had stopped. The room had stilled. Conversations faded into silence like a curtain dropping. Then Lady Pembroke's butler entered, face composed, voice carrying across the hush. Your Highness, he said, a message has arrived requesting your attention. Thomas's jaw tightened as if he already knew what it was. Mr. Ashcombe stepped forward and offered a folded note. Thomas took it, read it quickly, and his face went even more controlled. Helena's heart pounded. The Duchess's smile widened slightly, triumphant. Beatrice's eyes glittered. Thomas lifted his gaze. He took one slow step forward into the open space, where the room naturally formed a circle around importance. His voice was calm, perfectly steady, the voice of a prince who had practiced obedience like a language. It is my duty to announce that I will be entering formal discussions of engagement with Lady Beatrice Langford. The hush that followed Thomas's words was so complete that Eleanor could hear the soft rustle of a fan opening somewhere behind her. It is my duty to announce that I will be entering formal discussions of engagement with Lady Beatrice Langford. For a moment Eleanor could not feel her fingers. The room blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from the sudden effort it took to keep her face from changing. Beatrice's smile widened, perfectly timed. She dipped her head, as if receiving a crown. The Duchess of Harrow let out a soft sound that might have been satisfaction disguised as relief. How wise, she murmured, loud enough to be heard. Lady Pembroke's mouth tightened. Her eyes snapped to Thomas, then to Eleanor. Mr. Ashcombe stepped half a pace forward, as though the announcement had returned order to the universe. Eleanor stood very still. Thomas did not look at her. Not yet. He lifted his hand slightly, a gesture that asked for calm. Then he added, his voice just as steady, discussions. Not an engagement announcement, not a date, not a promise beyond what duty requires of me at this moment. A murmur spread, some disappointment mixed with renewed curiosity. Beatrice's smile held, but her eyes sharpened. Harrow's gaze narrowed, her pleasant expression tightening. Thomas, she said softly, you are splitting hairs. Thomas turned his head toward her, still calm. No, Your Grace, I am choosing my words carefully. Lady Pembroke stepped in, voice bright with false lightness. Well, then we shall all be very careful with our words tonight, shall we? A few polite laughs rose. The music resumed, tentative at first, as if the musicians were unsure whether they were allowed to breathe again. Thomas stepped back into the crowd, as though nothing had happened. That was the prince's greatest skill. He could make catastrophe look like a scheduled inconvenience. Eleanor remained where she was, her smile frozen, her mind racing. Beatrice drifted toward her with a graceful certainty. You see, Beatrice murmured, sweet as sugar. It is always easier when the proper choice is made. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Beatrice tilted her head. Oh, do not look so pale. You have done your part. You should feel proud. Eleanor forced air into her lungs. My part, yes, Beatrice said softly. You gave him his little delay, and now the court will be satisfied. Eleanor's voice came out careful. Is the court ever satisfied? Beatrice laughed quietly. Not with anyone it can control, but it will be satisfied enough to move forward. Lady Pembroke appeared beside Eleanor like a protective wall, her fan snapping open. "Lady Beatrice," she said, "surely you have other guests to charm." Beatrice smiled. "I charm all guests, Lady Pembroke." "And exhaust them," Lady Pembroke replied pleasantly. Beatrice's eyes glittered. "How amusing." She gave a small curtsy. "Enjoy your evening." She drifted away, leaving behind a chill that had nothing to do with weather. Lady Pembroke leaned toward Eleanor. "Breathe," she whispered. "Do not let them see you unravel." Eleanor's voice was thin. "He said her name." Lady Pembroke's eyes softened. "He said the words they demanded. That is not the same thing." Eleanor swallowed hard. "It feels the same." Lady Pembroke's expression tightened. "If you fall tonight, Harrow wins. Do you understand?" Eleanor nodded once. "Yes." Lady Pembroke's gaze flicked toward Thomas. "He is looking for you." Eleanor turned her head slightly. Thomas had resumed conversation with two gentlemen as though nothing had changed, but his eyes were scanning the room. When his gaze found Eleanor, it held for a fraction too long. He excused himself and came toward her. Lady Pembroke stepped back, giving just enough distance to preserve propriety. Thomas stopped beside Eleanor, close enough to be seen as attentive, far enough to be beyond reproach. His voice was low. "Are you steady?" Eleanor's smile did not move. "I am standing." "That is not what I asked," he said. Eleanor's throat tightened. "I am as steady as I can be." Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "Come. We will leave soon." Eleanor's fingers curled under her glove. "If we leave, they will say I fled." "They will say it regardless," Thomas murmured. "But they will say it in my absence, not to my face." Eleanor swallowed. "And what will they say about you?" Thomas's eyes met hers. "They always say things about me." She wanted to ask softly, "Then why did your words hurt so much?" But the room was not safe for that. Her own throat was not safe for that. Thomas guided her toward Lady Pembroke. "My lady," he said, polite and controlled, "thank you for your hospitality." Lady Pembroke's smile was bright and sharp. "Already departing, Thomas?" Thomas's tone remained even. "Lady Eleanor is tired." Lady Pembroke's eyes flicked to Eleanor with brief warmth. "Then we have worked her too hard." Thomas's gaze held Lady Pembroke's. "We have all worked too hard." Lady Pembroke's smile softened for a fraction. "Go then, and do not let Harrow use my drawing room as her stage again." Thomas inclined his head. "I will try to prevent it." Lady Pembroke's voice lowered as he turned. "Do more than try." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. They moved toward the exit. As they passed the crowd, Eleanor caught fragments. "Discussions," he said. "Only because of the little scandal. Who is she, truly?" Eleanor kept her face composed until the door closed behind them and the carriage door opened. Inside the carriage, the silence was different. No music, no eyes. Only Thomas across from her, his posture perfect, his face controlled. Eleanor's hands rested in her lap. She stared at her ring without moving it. Thomas spoke first. "Look at me." Eleanor did not want to. She did anyway. His eyes were steady. "I did not announce an engagement." Eleanor's voice was quiet. "You said you would enter discussions." "Yes," he replied. "To stop Harrow from turning the room into a tribunal. To stop the newspapers from printing that I refused the crown." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And to stop them from printing that you chose a thief." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You are not a thief." Eleanor's laugh was small and strained. "The room does not agree. The room does not decide truth," Thomas said. "The room decides reputation," Eleanor replied. Thomas stared at her for a moment. Then he said low, "I am sorry." The apology struck her harder than the announcement had. Eleanor's voice trembled. "Are you sorry because you hurt me, or because you had no choice?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Both," Eleanor swallowed. "That does not fix it." "No," he said. "But it matters that you know I did not enjoy saying her name." Eleanor's cheeks warmed with a strange, unwanted tenderness. "Enjoy is not the word I would use." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Nor would I." They rode in silence for several breaths. Then Eleanor forced herself to speak because silence would swallow her if she let it. "What happens to the contract now?" Thomas's gaze held hers. "It continues." Eleanor's chest tightened. "After tonight?" "Yes," he said. "Unless you tell me you cannot." Eleanor's fingers curled. If I tell you I cannot, I lose the payment. Thomas did not deny it. Yes. Eleanor looked down. Then I can. Thomas's voice softened. That is not what I want from you. Eleanor's voice went brittle. What you want is time. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in pain. What I needed was time. What I want now is different. Eleanor's breath caught. Different how? Thomas held her gaze for a beat, then looked away as though the carriage were suddenly too small for words he could not afford. Sleep, he said instead. Tomorrow we will speak properly. Eleanor's throat tightened. Properly. Yes, he said, with Mrs. Wynne present. No secrets, no insinuations. Eleanor stared at him. And if the Crown demands more than discussions? Thomas's jaw tightened. Then we will face that demand when it comes. We. The word sat between them like something fragile. When Eleanor returned to the palace, Mrs. Wynne met her at once, her expression sharp. How bad? Mrs. Wynne asked quietly. Eleanor's voice was controlled. He said he would enter discussions with Lady Beatrice. Mrs. Wynne's eyes narrowed. Discussions? Yes, Eleanor said, not an engagement announcement. Mrs. Wynne exhaled through her nose. A compromise. It buys him time and displeases everyone. Eleanor's throat tightened. Including me. Mrs. Wynne's gaze softened by a fraction. Yes, including you. Eleanor's fingers found the silver thimble in her pocket and pressed it hard enough to hurt. Mrs. Wynne noticed. Do not retreat into your hands. You will need your head, Eleanor whispered. They called me Nell. Mrs. Wynne's expression sharpened. Who did? Mrs. Kell, Eleanor said. From Hartwell Manor. Mrs. Wynne's mouth tightened. Of course. Eleanor stared at her. You know? Mrs. Wynne's eyes held Eleanor's. I suspected there was something. The palace does not choose random women, Eleanor. It chooses women it can control. Eleanor's breath caught. Then I was chosen because I am easy to discard. Mrs. Wynne did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. Eleanor's voice trembled. What do I do now? Mrs. Wynne's tone turned brisk. You will rest. You will not cry into your pillow loud enough for anyone to hear. And tomorrow you will tell the prince everything. Eleanor swallowed. Everything. Yes, Mrs. Wynne said, because if Harrow can smell hesitation, she will press harder. Eleanor's mouth went dry. And if he decides I am too dangerous? Mrs. Wynne's eyes were steady. Then you will leave with whatever you can take, and you will not look back. Eleanor's chest tightened. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, Mrs. Wynne replied. It is survival. The next morning, Eleanor was summoned to a sitting room on a quiet floor. The door was open. Mrs. Wynne stood inside, stiff and watchful. Thomas was already there, seated. Mr. Ashcombe stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, his expression controlled. Eleanor stopped in the doorway. Thomas rose. Lady Eleanor. The title sounded heavier now. Eleanor dipped her head. Your Highness. Thomas gestured to a chair. Sit. Eleanor sat, careful, controlled. Mrs. Wynne positioned herself where she could see everything. Thomas's voice was calm. You will speak now, fully. No phrases. No shields. Eleanor's throat tightened. Yes. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze flicked to her like a cold draught. Thomas's eyes held Eleanor's. Hartwell Manor. Why were you there? Eleanor swallowed. I was in service. Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. Thomas's voice remained even. Under what name? Eleanor's cheeks warmed with shame she did not deserve. Nell, she said quietly. It was a nickname. The mistress used it. I did not choose it. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. And the accusation. Eleanor took a breath. A brooch went missing. The mistress panicked. She searched her drawers. She accused the staff of being careless. Then she looked at me. Mr. Ashcombe's tone was flat. Why you? Eleanor's fingers curled in her lap. Because I was new. Because I had no one to defend me. Because I was quiet and easy to blame. Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. Did anyone search your things? Eleanor nodded. Yes. Mrs. Wynne's face tightened with anger. Eleanor's voice trembled but held. They found nothing, but they said that proved I had hidden it elsewhere. Then they began watching me. If I touched anything, someone stared. If I spoke, someone looked offended. If I did not speak, they said I was sly. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze remained hard. And then you left. Eleanor met his gaze for the first time. Yes, I left because staying meant being treated as guilty every day until they grew bored. Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. Or until something else went missing. Eleanor's face went still. I did not steal. Thomas's voice cut in, controlled. Ashcombe. Mr. Ashcombe said nothing, but his silence was disapproval. Thomas turned back to Eleanor. Did the brooch ever reappear? Eleanor shook her head. Not while I was there. Thomas's eyes held hers. Then how can you be sure you were not suspected for good reason? Eleanor's breath caught. The question stung, because it was fair in a cruel world. She answered carefully, because I know what I did, and because I saw where the brooch usually lay. It was kept in a small tray near the mistress's letters. Anyone could have moved it by accident. Anyone could have taken it. But they did not look at anyone else the way they looked at me. Thomas watched her for a long beat. Then he said quietly, Why did you never tell me? Eleanor's throat tightened. Because you were already asking me to pretend. And because I knew the contract had a clause that could send me away the moment someone disliked my name. Mrs. Wynne's chin lifted slightly, as if pleased Eleanor had spoken it aloud. Thomas's jaw tightened. I did not put that clause there to trap you. Eleanor's voice was soft. It still traps me. Thomas looked away for a moment, then back. Yes. He turned to Mr. Ashcombe. You will write to Hartwell Manor today. Mr. Ashcombe's expression sharpened. Your Highness, that could draw attention. Thomas's voice stayed calm. You will do it discreetly. Mr. Ashcombe hesitated. And if the reply confirms suspicion? Thomas's gaze held his. Then we will know. But we will not condemn her without knowing. Mr. Ashcombe's jaw tightened. As you wish. Thomas turned back to Eleanor. You will remain under my protection while we clarify this. Eleanor's throat tightened at the word protection again. And if the reply is unfavorable? Thomas's eyes held hers. Then we will face it. Eleanor's fingers curled. You say we again. Thomas's mouth tightened. Yes. Mr. Ashcombe bowed stiffly. I will draft the letter. Thomas nodded. Go. Mr. Ashcombe left, the door closing softly behind him. Silence fell. Mrs. Wynne did not move. Thomas spoke, low. You were accused of theft. That is the worst rumor for someone the court wants to tear down. Eleanor's voice was small. I know. Thomas's gaze sharpened. But I also know this. You did not flinch when Mrs. Kell spoke. Guilty people often do. Eleanor gave a soft, bitter laugh. Perhaps I am simply used to being blamed. Thomas's jaw tightened. That should not be something anyone is used to. Eleanor looked down at her hands. It is. Thomas's voice softened. Look at me. Eleanor looked up. His eyes were steady. I will not discard you because Harrow enjoys cruelty. Eleanor's throat tightened. You might be forced to discard me. Thomas's jaw tightened. That is what everyone assumes. Eleanor whispered, Is it true? Thomas stared at her for a beat. Then he said, quietly, I do not want it to be. Mrs. Wynne cleared her throat sharply, as if reminding them where they were. Thomas exhaled once, controlled. You will rest, he told Eleanor, and you will not meet anyone alone. Eleanor's voice was careful. Including you. Thomas's mouth tightened. Yes, including me. The court would like nothing more than a new rumor to replace the old. Eleanor nodded once. Yes? Thomas stood. Mrs. Wynne, stay with her. Mrs. Wynne inclined her head. Always. Thomas turned to Eleanor. I will send for you when I have an answer. Eleanor rose. Your Highness. Thomas held her gaze for a fraction longer than necessary. You did the right thing by telling me. Eleanor's breath caught. I only told you because I had no more place to hide. Thomas's voice was low. Then you will not hide any more. Over the next 2 days, the palace felt like a room full of listening walls. Eleanor passed servants who looked at her too quickly, then away. She heard her name soften into whispers behind doors. She heard Nell spoken once, then hurriedly corrected. Mrs. Wynne kept her close, correcting her posture even while they walked. Chin, Mrs. Wynne would murmur. Eleanor would lift it. On the 3rd day, a note arrived. Not for Eleanor. For Mrs. Wynne. Mrs. Wynne read it, her mouth tightening. Lady Beatrice requests your presence for tea, she said. Eleanor's stomach turned. Me? Mrs. Wynne's gaze sharpened. Yes. Eleanor's voice went quiet. I don't want to go. Mrs. Wynne's tone was brisk. You will go because refusing gives her power. Eleanor swallowed. And if she intends to humiliate me? Mrs. Wynne's eyes were steady. Then you will let her try. In Lady Beatrice's sitting room, everything was perfectly arranged to look effortless. Beatrice rose as Eleanor entered, smiling warmly. Lady Eleanor, Beatrice said, voice sweet. How kind of you to come. Eleanor dipped her head. Lady Beatrice. Beatrice gestured to a chair. Please, sit. We are women, after all. We might speak plainly. Mrs. Wynne remained near the door, watchful. Beatrice poured tea herself as though performing innocence. Sugar? No, thank you, Eleanor said. Beatrice smiled. How disciplined. Eleanor kept her face composed. Beatrice placed a cup before Eleanor. I will be frank, she said. The court does not enjoy uncertainty. Eleanor's voice was careful. Nor do I. Beatrice's eyes glittered. Then we share a preference. Eleanor did not answer. Beatrice leaned forward slightly, voice gentle. You have been placed in a difficult position, and you have handled it with admirable calm. Eleanor's fingers curled under her gloves. What do you want, Lady Beatrice? Beatrice smiled as if delighted by the directness. Good, you are learning. She opened a small drawer beside her and withdrew an envelope, thick and heavy. She slid it across the table. Eleanor stared at it. What is that? Beatrice's voice stayed sweet, enough to start a life quietly, somewhere respectable, far from gossip. Eleanor's throat tightened. You want me to disappear? Beatrice's smile softened. I want you to be safe. Eleanor's voice went steady. You want the prince. Beatrice's eyes hardened for a fraction, then smoothed. I want what is appropriate. Eleanor looked at the envelope without touching it. And if I refuse, Beatrice's smile remained, then you will remain in a position that will break you. Eleanor's breath trembled. You sound very certain. Beatrice's gaze held hers. Because I know how this world works. Eleanor's voice was quiet. I know how it works too. Beatrice's tone softened as if offering pity. Then take it. Walk away with dignity. Do not let them drag you. Eleanor lifted her chin. Dignity is not being bought to erase myself. Beatrice's eyes narrowed slightly. You are being stubborn. Eleanor's voice stayed calm. I am being honest. Beatrice's smile sharpened. Honesty is a luxury. Eleanor met her gaze. So is cruelty. Beatrice's eyes flashed. Cruelty, she repeated softly. I am offering you mercy. Eleanor's voice was steady. Mercy would be leaving me alone. Beatrice's smile returned, colder now. Very well. Refuse, but do not expect the prince to ruin himself for you. Eleanor's chest tightened. I have not asked him to. Beatrice tilted her head. No, you only stand near him and let him imagine he is noble. Eleanor's fingers clenched. He is noble. Beatrice laughed softly. We shall see. Eleanor rose, keeping her movements controlled. I will not take your envelope. Beatrice's smile stayed perfect. As you wish. Eleanor dipped her head. Good day, Lady Beatrice. Beatrice watched her go, eyes bright. Good day, Lady Eleanor. Outside, Mrs. Wynne exhaled sharply. You refused. Eleanor's voice trembled. Yes. Mrs. Wynne's gaze was hard. Good, because if you had taken it, she would have called you greedy. Eleanor swallowed. And now she will call me foolish. Mrs. Wynne nodded. Yes. But foolish is easier to survive than purchased. That evening, Thomas summoned Eleanor again to the same sitting room. The door was open. Mrs. Wynne was present. Mr. Ashcombe stood near the window holding a letter. Thomas's face was composed, but his eyes held something that made Eleanor's breath catch. He gestured to the chair. Sit. Eleanor sat. Thomas's voice was calm. We have an answer. Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened as he handed the letter to Thomas. Thomas read a line, then looked up at Eleanor. The mistress at Hartwell Manor found the brooch. Eleanor's breath stopped. Thomas's voice remained steady. It was in a sewing basket. It had fallen into the lining. Eleanor's fingers went cold. Thomas continued. The letter says she regrets how she behaved. She says you were treated unjustly. Eleanor's throat tightened so sharply she could not speak at once. Mrs. Wynne's eyes closed briefly, as if in relief. Mr. Ashcombe looked away, stiff with unwilling acknowledgement. Eleanor managed, "So, they know?" Thomas nodded once. "Yes." Eleanor's voice trembled. "Then why did Mrs. Kell speak as if—" "Mr." Ashcombe cut in, tone clipped. "Mrs. Kell did not include that detail." Eleanor's eyes snapped to him. "She knew." Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. "Likely." Thomas's gaze hardened. "And Harrow brought her anyway." Mrs. Wynne said quietly, "Of course she did." Eleanor's chest tightened. "Then my name was dragged through a drawing room for sport." Thomas's voice was low. "Yes." Eleanor's eyes stung. She forced them clear. "What will you do?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "First, this letter will be kept. Second, Mrs. Kell will not be invited into royal houses again. Third, Harrow will be told to stop." Mr. Ashcombe's tone was careful. "Your Highness, telling the Duchess of Harrow to stop is not the same as making her stop." Thomas looked at him. "Then watch me try." Mr. Ashcombe's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Thomas turned back to Eleanor. His voice softened. "You were telling the truth." Eleanor's breath trembled. "I was." Thomas held her gaze. "And you still believed I might discard you?" Eleanor's voice was quiet. "Because I know what a contract is." Thomas's mouth tightened. "And what am I?" Eleanor blinked, startled by the question. Thomas's eyes held hers. "Am I only a contract?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "Your Highness," Mrs. Wynne cleared her throat sharply again, warning. Thomas exhaled, controlled, and nodded once as though reining himself back. "Ashcombe," he said, "leave us." Mr. Ashcombe hesitated. "Your Highness." "The door will remain open," Thomas said evenly. "Go." Mr. Ashcombe bowed stiffly and left. Mrs. Wynne did not move. Thomas looked at her. "Mrs. Wynne, stay. But do not interrupt unless you must." Mrs. Wynne inclined her head. "As you wish." Thomas turned back to Eleanor. His voice lowered, not secretive, simply intimate despite the open door. "This began as strategy," he said. "I do not pretend otherwise." Eleanor's fingers curled. "Yes." Thomas's gaze held hers. "And then I watched you stand in that room while they tried to strip you of dignity with smiles." Eleanor swallowed. "I did what I had to do." Thomas nodded. "So did I. And I hated it." Eleanor's breath caught. "You hated what?" "Hearing them speak of you as if you were a tool," Thomas said, "and hearing myself speak as if I could place you, move you, and call it protection." Eleanor's throat tightened. "That is what the contract says." Thomas's eyes sharpened. "Then I am telling you I no longer want the contract to be the truth between us." Eleanor stared at him, heart pounding. "What do you want, then?" Thomas's jaw tightened, as if the words cost him. "I want you to stay because you choose to stay. Not because you are hungry, not because you are trapped." Eleanor's voice trembled. "And what would that cost you?" Thomas held her gaze. "It may cost me everything I have been trained to be." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Then why say it?" Thomas's voice went quieter. "Because if I do not say it now, I will spend the rest of my life speaking only what others want to hear." Eleanor's fingers clenched. "You said her name." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I did, and I will not pretend it did not wound you, but I said it to stop them from crushing you under their certainty." Eleanor's voice was soft. "And did it?" Thomas's eyes held hers. "It bought time." Eleanor swallowed. "Time for what?" Thomas hesitated, then said plainly, "Time to choose you properly." Eleanor's breath caught. Mrs. Wynne shifted slightly but did not speak. Eleanor's voice came out careful, almost afraid of its own strength. "I will not be anyone's secret." Thomas nodded once. "You will not." "I will not be dismissed and told to vanish because someone finds me inconvenient," Eleanor said, voice trembling with anger she had swallowed too long. Thomas's gaze hardened. "You will not." Eleanor's chest rose and fell. "And I will not be treated as a charity." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Then do not let me treat you that way." Eleanor's eyes stung. "How can you not, when you have so much and I have so little?" Thomas's voice was steady. "By listening when you say no." Eleanor's throat tightened. She swallowed. "Then hear me now." Thomas waited. Eleanor lifted her chin. If we move forward, it must be openly, with dignity, with the truth. Thomas's breath slowed. Yes. Eleanor's voice trembled. And if you cannot give that? Thomas's eyes held hers. Then you will walk away. Eleanor nodded once, the decision like a blade made clean. Yes. Thomas exhaled once, and his expression softened in a way that made him look younger, almost relieved. Then we are agreed. Eleanor's breath caught. Agreed to what? Thomas's voice was quiet. Agreed that we will stop letting others write our story. Eleanor stared at him, her heart pounding, her fear still present but no longer ruling every breath. Mrs. Wynne spoke at last, tone brisk. Then you must both understand what comes next. Thomas nodded. Yes. Mrs. Wynne's eyes moved to Eleanor. If he chooses you openly, the court will resist. Eleanor's voice was steady. Let it. Mrs. Wynne's mouth tightened in approval. Good. Thomas rose slowly, then offered his hand, palm up, not grabbing, not claiming, simply offering. Eleanor looked at it as if it were the most dangerous thing in the room. Thomas's voice was low. No more contracts between us, he said. Not in the way that matters. Eleanor's breath trembled. Then she placed her hand in his, careful and firm, and for the first time she felt she was not being pulled into a role but stepping into a choice. The moment Eleanor's hand settled in Thomas's, the room seemed to change its shape, not because the walls moved, because she did. She did not shrink. She did not flinch. She simply held on as if her own choice had weight enough to steady her. Thomas's fingers closed around hers with careful restraint, as though he feared frightening her away. Mrs. Wynne watched them both, face stern, eyes sharp. Very well, Mrs. Wynne said. If you mean to stop letting others write your story, you must begin today. Thomas nodded once. Yes. Eleanor drew a breath. Today. Thomas released her hand at once, not because he wanted to, but because the palace always demanded distance. He looked at Mrs. Wynne. Send word to Ashcombe. Mrs. Wynne's mouth tightened. He will be displeased. Thomas's voice was calm. He can endure displeasure. Mrs. Wynne went to the open doorway and spoke to a footman in a low voice. The footman hurried away. Eleanor's fingers tingled where Thomas had held them. She curled them carefully in her lap so she would not touch the ring again. Thomas faced her. You said openly, with dignity, with the truth. Eleanor's voice was steady. Yes. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then you must understand what the truth looks like in this place. It looks like a formal request. It looks like an audience. It looks like people with titles deciding what is suitable. Eleanor lifted her chin. Let them decide. I am still myself. His gaze held hers. And if they refuse? Eleanor's breath caught. Then... Thomas stepped half a pace closer, still proper, still careful. Then I will choose you anyway. Mrs. Wynne returned, expression unreadable. Mr. Ashcombe is on his way. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Thomas's voice softened. Do not fear him. Eleanor managed. I fear everyone who can end my life with a sentence. Thomas's eyes narrowed with something like pain. Then let us take that power from them. Footsteps approached. Mr. Ashcombe entered, composed as ever, but his eyes were sharp. To your Highness, he said, bowing. You sent for me. Thomas gestured to a chair. Sit. Mr. Ashcombe sat, though his posture suggested he would rather stand and lecture. Thomas's tone remained even. The letter from Hartwell Manor clears Lady Eleanor. Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. It clears her of that particular accusation. Eleanor's hands clenched. Thomas's gaze sharpened. And it proves Harrow used a half-truth to humiliate her. Mr. Ashcombe lifted his chin. Your Highness, humiliation is not a legal category. Thomas's voice cooled. No, it is merely a favourite sport. Mr. Ashcombe looked briefly at Eleanor, then back. What do you intend? Thomas did not hesitate. I intend to request an audience with the Crown. Mr. Ashcombe's expression tightened. To what end? To end the discussions with Lady Beatrice, Thomas said, and to announce my intention to marry Lady Eleanor. Silence. Eleanor felt her pulse hammer in her throat. Mr. Ashcombe's face did not change much, but his eyes did. They sharpened as if calculating damage. Your Highness, he said carefully, that is not a small decision. Thomas's voice remained calm. No. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze flicked to Eleanor again. The court will question her origin. Eleanor's chin lifted a fraction. Thomas's voice was steady. Then we will answer with the truth. She is a woman of good character who was treated unjustly, and she will be supported by Lady Pembroke as sponsor. Mrs. Wynne's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised. Eleanor turned her head. Lady Pembroke would do that. Thomas's gaze held hers. I asked her. Eleanor's throat tightened. When? Thomas's mouth tightened. This morning. Before you arrived. Eleanor's breath trembled. It was strange being considered in plans rather than used in them. Mr. Ashcombe's tone remained polite, but edged. Lady Pembroke may sponsor her in society, but the Crown will still prefer a bride of established lineage. Thomas's voice went colder. The Crown prefers obedience. Mr. Ashcombe did not deny it. Yes. Thomas leaned forward slightly. And I am offering obedience in one way and refusal in another. I will serve, I will attend, I will sign what must be signed, but I will not sell my life to a match made for convenience. Mr. Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. You are speaking of love. Thomas's jaw tightened. I am speaking of honesty. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze flicked to Eleanor. And you, Lady Eleanor, are you prepared for what this will cost him? Eleanor met his eyes. Are you prepared for what it has already cost me? Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. That is not an answer. It is, Eleanor said softly, because it is the truth. I have paid in whispers, in looks, in being called a thief in a drawing room. I am still standing. Mr. Ashcombe studied her, perhaps looking for trembling. Finding none, his expression tightened further. Thomas said, Ashcombe, arrange the audience. Mr. Ashcombe hesitated. Your Highness, Thomas's voice cut cleanly through. Arrange it. Mr. Ashcombe bowed, stiff. Yes, Your Highness. When he rose to leave, he paused in the doorway and looked back at Thomas. The Duchess of Harrow will not stop. Thomas's gaze was steady. Then she will watch herself fail. Mr. Ashcombe left. Eleanor exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath since the previous evening. Mrs. Wynne said briskly, You will not be alone today. Eleanor nodded. I understand. Thomas's eyes held hers. Will you come to Lady Pembroke's before the audience? Eleanor blinked. Why? Thomas's voice softened. Because if the Crown demands to know who stands with you, I want an answer ready. A real one. Eleanor's throat tightened. All right. They went separately, as propriety demanded. Eleanor rode with Mrs. Wynne. Thomas went by another route with his own attendants. At Lady Pembroke's house, the drawing room felt different from the last time. Less musical evening, more quiet resolve. Lady Pembroke rose as Eleanor entered and crossed the room with direct purpose. My dear, she said, taking Eleanor's hands without waiting for permission. Look at you, still standing. Eleanor's eyes stung. It seems to be all I do lately. Lady Pembroke smiled, not unkindly. Then you are getting very good at it. Mrs. Wynne gave a small curtsy. My lady. Lady Pembroke nodded to her, then looked back at Eleanor. Thomas told me you were accused unjustly once. I'm sorry. Eleanor swallowed. It is not your fault. Lady Pembroke's smile tightened. It is everyone's fault who enjoys watching a woman suffer as entertainment. Eleanor's breath trembled. You said you would sponsor me. I did, Lady Pembroke replied, and I will. Eleanor's mouth went dry. Why would you do that? Lady Pembroke's eyes sharpened. Because if I do not, the Duchess of Harrow will be the only woman speaking loudly about you, and she will speak loudly until you vanish. Eleanor's fingers curled. I don't want to vanish. Good, Lady Pembroke said. Then we are agreed. A footman announced, His Highness. Thomas entered, composed, but his eyes went straight to Eleanor, as if checking she was still there. Lady Pembroke approached him. Thomas, my lady, he said, respectful. Lady Pembroke's tone turned crisp. I will do what I promised, but I will not have her treated like a sacrifice. Thomas's jaw tightened. Nor will I. Lady Pembroke's gaze narrowed. Do you know what they will say? Thomas's voice was even. Yes. Lady Pembroke's fan snapped open. Then do not make her face it alone. Thomas looked at Eleanor. I won't. Lady Pembroke nodded once, satisfied. Then she looked at Eleanor again. If anyone asks who introduced you, you will say I did. Eleanor blinked. But the prince introduced me. "And I will say I approved it," Lady Pembroke replied. "It is not the whole truth, but it is a truth that fits their rules." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Thank you." Lady Pembroke squeezed her hands briefly. "Do not thank me yet. Save your breath for the audience." The palace later that day felt colder, not in temperature, but in expectation. Eleanor waited in a small anteroom with Mrs. Wynne and Lady Pembroke. The door beyond remained closed. On the other side, Thomas met with advisers. Eleanor could not hear his words, but she could feel the pressure in every passing footstep. Then the door opened. A lady-in-waiting appeared, face composed. "Lady Eleanor, Lady Pembroke, you may enter." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Lady Pembroke leaned close. "Boredom," she whispered. "Remember, not fear." Eleanor drew a slow breath. "Yes." They entered. The room was formal, measured, arranged to remind a person of her size. Thomas stood already before the central figures of power. He was composed, but Eleanor saw tension in the set of his jaw. Mr. Ashcombe stood to one side, expression controlled. The Duchess of Harrow was present too, of course. She looked pleased, as though she had secured a front-row seat to Eleanor's dismissal, and Lady Beatrice stood near Harrow, serene, perfect, eyes bright with anticipation. Eleanor's heart hammered. Thomas turned his head slightly, and his eyes found Eleanor. The look was brief, proper, but it steadied her like a hand at her back. The lady-in-waiting announced, "Lady Eleanor, under the sponsorship of Lady Pembroke." Lady Pembroke stepped forward first, curtsied with effortless authority. "Your Majesty." Eleanor followed, curtsying as she had been taught, not too low, not too timid. A calm voice addressed them. "Lady Pembroke, you speak for this young woman?" "Yes," Lady Pembroke replied clearly. "I do." The voice turned toward Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, you have been the subject of rumour." Eleanor kept her chin lifted. "Yes, Your Majesty." Harrow's smile sharpened slightly. The voice continued, "Rumour is often the shadow of truth. What is your truth?" Eleanor's throat tightened. She glanced once at Thomas, then back forward. "My truth is simple," Eleanor said. "I worked in service when I was younger. I was accused unjustly. The accusation has been corrected, and I have a letter proving it." Mr. Ashcombe stepped forward at once, offering the Hartwell Manor letter with careful hands. Harrow's expression did not change, but her eyes narrowed. Beatrice's smile tightened for a fraction. The voice said, "Read the relevant portion." Mr. Ashcombe read aloud, the words formal and reluctant, but clear. The brooch had been found. Eleanor had been treated unjustly. Regret was expressed. A quiet pause followed. Harrow spoke sweetly. "Regret is convenient after the fact." Lady Pembroke's fan snapped. "So is cruelty before it." Harrow's eyes flashed. "Lady Pembroke." Lady Pembroke's tone remained pleasant. "Your Grace." The voice said, "Enough." Silence returned at once. The voice addressed Eleanor again. "You understand what it would mean to marry into this life?" Eleanor's fingers curled under her gloves. She kept her posture. "It would mean," Eleanor said, "that I will be watched, judged, measured, that I will make mistakes and be punished for them with whispers." Harrow's smile returned, satisfied. Eleanor continued, voice steady. "It would also mean that I will be honest, and I will not be bought into silence. I will not pretend I am someone else, but I will conduct myself with respect." The room held still. The voice said, "And you believe you can endure it?" Eleanor took a slow breath. "I have endured worse without being allowed to speak. At least here, I may speak the truth." Thomas's jaw tightened as if holding back something he could not say in this room. The voice turned to Thomas. "And you, Thomas, you entered discussions with Lady Beatrice?" Thomas's voice was calm. "Yes, Your Majesty." Beatrice lifted her chin slightly, serene. The voice continued, "Do you seek to end those discussions?" Thomas did not glance at Beatrice. He did not glance at Harrow. He kept his gaze forward. "Yes," he said. Beatrice's smile froze. Harrow's eyes narrowed sharply. The voice said, "For what reason?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Because I will not marry as though I am signing a ledger, and because I will not allow Lady Eleanor to be used as a shield and then discarded." Harrow let out a soft, disapproving sound. Beatrice's voice was sweet, controlled. "Your Majesty, Thomas is under strain. He has allowed sentiment." Thomas cut in. still respectful, but firm. Lady Beatrice. Beatrice's smile did not move. Yes? Thomas turned his head slightly toward her. How you have been treated with courtesy. You deserve honesty in return. I will not proceed. Beatrice's eyes flashed. You are humiliating me. Thomas's voice remained calm. I am ending a plan that should never have been presented as inevitable. Harrow spoke sharply, her sweetness thinning. Thomas, you cannot simply cast aside a suitable match for a girl of uncertain origin. Eleanor's chest tightened. Thomas's gaze turned to Harrow, steady and cold. Her origin is not uncertain. Her character has been tested publicly, which is more than I can say for some. Harrow's eyes glittered. How dare you? Lady Pembroke's fan snapped again. He dares because he is finally tired of your games. The voice said, Lady Pembroke. Lady Pembroke fell silent, though her eyes remained fierce. The voice returned to Thomas. If permission is not granted, what will you do? Thomas's throat moved as he swallowed. Then he said clearly, I will still marry her. I will accept whatever consequence follows, but I will not lie through my life. Eleanor's breath caught. The words were simple, but they landed like a bell. A long pause followed. Beatrice's face remained composed, but her eyes had gone hard. Your Majesty, she said softly, this is reckless. Harrow murmured, it is disgraceful. Lady Pembroke said, quiet but cutting, it is love. The voice did not respond to any of them at once. Then calmly it said, Lady Beatrice, you will be treated with respect. This matter ends here. Beatrice's chin lifted. Yes, Your Majesty. Her eyes flicked toward Eleanor, sharp as a pin, then away. The voice said, Duchess of Harrow, you will not pursue this woman further. Harrow's smile tightened. Your Majesty. The voice continued, you have mistaken control for loyalty. They are not the same. Harrow held herself perfectly still. I hear, Your Majesty. Then the voice addressed Thomas. If you choose her, you must protect her with more than words. Thomas's voice was steady. I will. The voice turned toward Eleanor. Lady Eleanor, you will not be given this life as a reward. You will be expected to bear it. Eleanor swallowed. I understand. The voice paused. Then you may marry. Eleanor's breath left her in a quiet rush she could not hide. Thomas's shoulders eased by the smallest degree, as if he had been holding up a roof. Lady Pembroke closed her eyes briefly, as though in relief. Mr. Ashcombe's face remained composed, but something in his gaze shifted, reluctant acknowledgement replacing pure resistance. Beatrice curtsied with perfect control, then turned and left without another word. Harrow curtsied too, but her eyes stayed bright with wounded pride. She followed, slower, as if refusing to hurry for anyone. When the doors closed and the formal weight of the audience lifted, Thomas turned toward Eleanor. For a moment he forgot the room and simply looked at her. Eleanor's throat tightened. You said you would marry me even if they refused. Thomas's voice was low. Yes. Eleanor's eyes stung. You meant it. I always mean what I say to you, he replied. Mrs. Wynne cleared her throat sharply, as if reminding them that the palace did not allow tenderness to sprawl. Thomas exhaled, then offered Eleanor his arm. Come. Eleanor took it, careful, and they left the room together. In the corridor beyond, Lady Pembroke let out a breath and said, Well? Thomas glanced at her. My lady. Lady Pembroke's eyes were bright. You did it. Thomas's mouth tightened. I began it. The rest will be work. Lady Pembroke looked at Eleanor. And you, my dear, are you still bored? Eleanor gave a shaky, honest smile. No, my lady. Lady Pembroke laughed softly. Good. Then you are alive. Mr. Ashcombe stepped closer, voice measured. Your Highness. Thomas turned. Yes, Mr. Ashcombe hesitated, then said, I will ensure the arrangements are handled properly, quietly, with dignity. Eleanor's chest tightened. She had not expected that. Thomas studied him. Thank you. Mr. Ashcombe's gaze flicked briefly to Eleanor. Lady Eleanor. Eleanor inclined her head. Sir. Mr. Ashcombe cleared his throat stiff. For what it is worth, you did not crumble. Eleanor blinked. For what it is worth, I did not have the luxury. Mr. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. Quite. Then he stepped away. The wedding was arranged quickly, not for spectacle, but to close the door before rumor could wedge itself open again. Eleanor stood in a small chamber off the chapel with Mrs. Wynne, her hands folded, her breathing steady. Mrs. Wynne adjusted Eleanor's glove with brisk precision. "Do you understand what you have done?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "I said yes." Mrs. Wynne's eyes softened by a fraction. "You said yes without begging." "That is the difference." Eleanor swallowed. "Will they forgive me?" Mrs. Wynne snorted softly. "Forgiveness is too generous a word for people who enjoy punishment." Eleanor's fingers found the silver thimble in her pocket, and she pressed it once, hard, as if taking strength from its plainness. Mrs. Wynne noticed and nodded. "Keep it. You will need reminders of who you are when they try to rename you." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Wynne." Mrs. Wynne's mouth tightened. "Do not thank me. Live well. That will be thanks enough." The chapel doors opened. Lady Pembroke stood waiting, a steady presence. "Come," she whispered to Eleanor. "Your prince is trying not to pace." Eleanor gave a small, trembling laugh. "He paces." Lady Pembroke smiled. "He is human. Don't tell anyone. It will shock them." Eleanor walked forward. Thomas stood at the front, composed, but his eyes betrayed him. The moment he saw her, something in his expression softened, like a man finally setting down a weight. When Eleanor reached him, he offered his hand, palm up, the same way he had in the sitting room, not claiming, asking. Eleanor placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently, and his thumb shifted once, a small steadying motion that made her breath catch. He leaned slightly closer, voice low. "Are you afraid?" Eleanor's eyes lifted to his. "Yes." Thomas's gaze held hers. "Are you still choosing me?" Eleanor swallowed. "Yes." His breath left him, quiet. "Then I am not afraid." The vows were spoken with careful words, formal and clear. Eleanor repeated them without stumbling. When the ring was placed in her hand, her fingers trembled. Thomas watched her closely. "Steady," he murmured. Eleanor drew a slow breath and slid the ring onto his finger with deliberate care, as if making a promise not only to him but to herself. Thomas placed the ring on her finger, his touch brief, but it warmed her skin through the glove. When the final words were said, and they turned to face the small gathering, Eleanor felt the room's scrutiny like a familiar pressure. Then Thomas shifted slightly, placing himself beside her with unmistakable intention. Not in front of her, beside her. Lady Pembroke smiled, satisfied. Mrs. Wynne's expression remained stern, but her eyes looked almost proud. Mr. Ashcombe stood stiffly, then gave a short, respectful bow. Outside the chapel, Beatrice was not present. Harrow was not present. Their absence was loud, but it did not matter as much as Eleanor had once thought it would. In a quieter corridor afterward, when it was permitted, Thomas stopped Eleanor near a tall window where they could be seen and still be alone in the only way the palace allowed. He did not touch her face, he did not pull her close. He simply took her gloved hands in his. Eleanor looked at him, breath trembling. Thomas's voice was low. "We began with a lie." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Yes." Thomas's eyes held hers. "We end with the truth." Eleanor swallowed. "And what is the truth?" Thomas's mouth tightened with emotion. He tried to control and failed, just slightly. "That you are not a role. You are not a contract. You are my wife." Eleanor's eyes stung. "Say it again." Thomas blinked once, as if surprised by his own boldness, then nodded. "You are my wife." Eleanor's breath shook. "And you are mine." Thomas's gaze softened. "Do you know what I wanted to do the first day I offered you that paper?" Eleanor's cheeks warmed. "No. I wanted to apologize," he said, "for dragging you into my world." Eleanor's voice trembled. "And now?" Thomas's fingers tightened gently around hers. "Now I want to thank you for refusing to disappear." Eleanor let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sob at once. "I nearly did." Thomas's eyes narrowed with quiet intensity. "Never again." Eleanor's chest rose and fell. "Promise." Thomas's voice was steady. "I promise." Eleanor's fingers shifted, and the silver thimble slipped from her pocket into her palm, almost without thought. She looked down at it, embarrassed by its plainness. Thomas noticed and did not smile. He simply said softly, "May I see it?" Eleanor hesitated, then placed it in his hand. Thomas held it carefully, as if it were precious. "This is real," he said. "This is you." Eleanor's throat tightened. "It was my mother's." Thomas's eyes softened. Then we will keep it, not as a reminder of poverty, as a reminder of strength. Eleanor swallowed hard. You make it sound noble. Thomas looked at her steadily. It is noble. Eleanor took the thimble back and tucked it away again, her fingers steadier now. A footman appeared at a respectful distance. Your Highness, the household awaits. Thomas nodded. We will come. The footman withdrew. Eleanor's breath trembled. They will watch me now. Thomas's voice was low. Let them. They watched you before. The difference is that now they cannot pretend you are alone. Eleanor's eyes stung again. I'm not. Thomas's gaze held hers. No. They walked forward together. And as Eleanor stepped into the corridor where whispers once tried to make her vanish, she did not lower her eyes because she finally understood something simple and permanent. Love did not erase where she came from, but it did give her the courage to stand where she was. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.